Hello and welcome to Six Pack. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku was the White Wolf? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Garaki was too caught up in his own little moral quandary to listen to the boy who stood before him eagerly await the verdict on what his written gifts, or quirks, as the ignorant mortal population called them, would be. As soon as Garaki saw the boy's hands, it became clear to those in the know why he had not displayed any of the powers that were typical since the locus rendering. He had the same length of fingers. No spirits would, or even could, form a bond with the whippersnapper because the child was born a werewolf. Naturally, he was unable to speak because his mother was ostensibly unaware of her wolf-blooded ancestry. The oath of the moon still applied despite everything, and the herd must be unaware. At least to her. Should he disclose this information to his covert master and ensure the child's future well in advance of his first change? Or should he follow tradition and wait for this, Izuku, to develop his own abilities so that he can discover the world beneath the one he had known his entire life on his own terms? He knew what to say to the child today, anyway. After showing them the X-ray of Izuku's hand and explaining incoherently how his joint structure was related to the gene that allowed quirk development, he said, "You're probably going to quirkless." Sorry, kid. He had discovered over the centuries that people would accept a lot before acknowledging that their science uncovered a pretty limited window, even with all the spirits had done in plain sight. Finally, he offered them a glimmer of hope. It's technically possible you're a late bloomer. Sometimes people like this develop quirks as adults instead of as children, but to be frank kid, you're not going to get it in time to get into a hero school. He wouldn't get one that was completely public without raising a lot of questions that, depending on who eventually discovered him, the oath of the moon or the oath of the pure would prevent him from answering. The child's tears only caused him to snort inwardly. You'll have a lot more reasons to be sad in the future, child. Many people believed that the mighty wolf had multiple quirks. Most villains who opposed him said that an overwhelming force that entered their minds and made them sluggish and afraid was what drove them to surrender, not fear. Most thought that was just a face-saving tactic. Izuku was unable to determine if he was one of them. Although it was thrilling to think that his idol could intimidate evildoers into submission with his mere presence, the prospect of his multifaceted quirk being able to control not only his own body but also the minds of others was simply too intriguing to ignore. If there was any truth to the rumors, he suspected it had something to do with his howling. Probably just to fit his theme. The mighty wolf always did it before getting serious about a battle, but it always seemed like it was accomplishing more. Furthermore, if that great hero had two quirks, perhaps Izuku's had been bestowed upon him by the universe, which would suggest that his quirklessness had a purpose. It had been another late night, anyway. This had been the case for some time. Whenever the moon was in view, he felt a peculiar sensation. It had an impact on him in some way and made him feel things he wouldn't normally. Most likely, it was just stress. A 12-year-old boy was sulking outside his home. It was always like this. Tenko would either sit and take it or fight back in some pointless attempt that only hurt himself when his father became upset about something that had to do with his grandmother but was also somehow his only son's fault. After that, he would sit here in the backyard. Tenko's father's treatment of him was obviously wrong, but the rest of the family refused to take any action and instead chose to watch events unfold. He was always annoyed by it, but tonight it annoyed him even more for some reason. It had something to do with the moon. Even he was aware of how absurd it sounded, but he was still incensed, not because he detested it, but because it fueled his rage. When he looked up at the full moon, which was white and bright and staring down at him, making the night around him seem nearly as bright as the day. Feel the anger. Accept the warrior's rage. Allow it to motivate you to defend Mother Luna. Tenko didn't want to or had time to think about what had just been said because his sister had gone outside. "I'm sorry about what Dad said to you. He shouldn't get so angry." She did apologize for what he had said. Not in relation to her actions. The anger was worse than anything he had ever experienced, and he started to scratch at himself as it heated up. "I mean, he's in the wrong, but you also shouldn't provoke him, you know?" He snapped at that. The moonlight, the increasing itching, as though he were growing fur everywhere, and his sister's well-intentioned, always well-intentioned, never well-doing, words all ran through his veins, making his heart beat unnaturally quickly, making him taller, and making him growl like an animal. Terrified, his sister took a step back. For what reason was she afraid? Given his uniformly long fingers and lack of eccentricities, what danger could he possibly pose? The danger posed by a predator to its victim. He was unaware of his own growth, the development of the fur, claws, and teeth, or any other indication of his enormous metamorphosis. The only thing Tenko was really thinking about was how furious he was. His sister fell to the back in a single swoop when she attempted to run. Later, as he tore her to pieces, his mother would go into hysterics. Neither would he recall doing. The only thing he would recall from this adventure, though, was how his father stood motionless in front of him in his final moments, resentfully pointing out that his own mother had betrayed him once more. Tenko didn't know what that meant, and he wasn't in a condition that made him even concerned. After eliminating the irate, violent, and resentful old man, he turned around without realizing he had done so because he had eaten all of his prey. Tenko found himself unable to do anything but gaze at the moon while naked, his clothes ripped apart by the first transformation, and covered in the blood of his family. He heard it whisper more. He was its offspring. It was betrayed by him. It gave him a gift. He was cursed by it. For a large portion of the night, these digressions would dominate his thoughts as he wandered in a daze, frightening the passers-by who wouldn't even raise an eyebrow at the eerie, seemingly homeless child until one man came forward. "You changed on the full moon. That's never a pleasant experience. The bitch mother truly loves to torment her supposed children. Typical for a monster like her." Unresponsive, Tenko gazed at him. "Don't worry, I know about what just happened, and I can explain why you are what you are. You are not human, not anymore. You are part human, part wolf spirit, the greatest of predators. You are, also, unfortunately, part moon spirit." He spat out the final phrase, "But we can burn that away. Come with me, poor child, and become one of the pure." His complete lack of a quirk meant that he would never be able to pursue his dream of becoming a hero. In the eyes of some, it demonstrated strength of character to give up on an impossible dream and learn to find happiness elsewhere. Those were not Izuku's people. As far as he knew, he would not give up on his dream of becoming a pro-hero until he had poured all of his heart, blood, and sweat into the endeavor. Even though he had reportedly performed well enough in theoretical coursework to be invited to UA's entrance exam, the most prestigious hero school in the nation, the majority of his classmates laughed, and the one who hadn't laughed was filled with an inexplicable, uncontrollable rage. Today was one of those days that involved a lot of crying. It seems that Bakugo had a story in which he was the only member of his lower middle-class neighborhood to gain admission to the nation's top school, and he was the protagonist of a classic comic book tale. He was prompted to demand that Izuku reconsider his life, destroy his notebook, and, more or less in that order, have him commit suicide because not only had someone else applied, but it was the one without a quirk. This is when Izuku declined. Izuku could follow his dreams, even if he couldn't bring himself to confront Bakugo. That's what the mighty wolf would do. Suddenly, he was encircled by a green mass of slime. He was unable to breathe. Either someone's quirk had released a substance that engulfed him, or someone had used a quirk to change into someone else and encircled the unfortunate boy. It made no difference, as he grasped and attempted in vain to tear through the slime, only to discover that it was too viscous for him to work with. He was about to asphyxiate at this rate and was not making any progress at all. Was it going to end like this? A strange loser, despised and unsuccessful, killed by an unknown bad guy before he could even try to see if he could be a hero? If Mighty Wolf could see the boy now, what would he think? Someone's claws found a grip where Izuku's hands were unable to gain traction. With the trembling mass of slime around him being torn into and ripped apart, Izuku's barely conscious vision could just make out the muscular, hairy face of Mighty Wolf? Since his brain was depleted of oxygen, he must be having hallucinations. Someone called out to him, "Hey, kid," in a rough but reassuring tone. "Are you okay?" Izuku was groggily regaining consciousness when he saw Mighty Wolf's vaguely wolf-like face again, but more like the Wolfman from the original film than a real wolf. "Well, I guess as far as near-death visions go, this isn't the worst," he replied. "Well, then, if everything's fine, then be sure to check out a medic soon, and I'm off." Izuku was beginning to realize that Mighty Wolf was actually the hero who had just saved his life and not a hallucination as he began to let out his trademark howl. "Oh my gosh, thank you so much, you are Mighty Wolf, I'm your biggest fan, how can I repay, can you sign me no book?" "Already done. Now I'm on my way." Indeed, Mighty Wolf had signed the child's notebook during his absence. It wasn't a huge deal. However, he discovered that he had a major problem when he dug his claws into a nearby building to start climbing it. The child wouldn't leave him alone, and after waiting to make sure the boy was okay, he was actually running low on essence. He was going to transform into issue form, and he didn't want anyone to see him switch between the two forms after all the work he had done to ensure that Dalu form wouldn't cause lunacy in the general population. The boy cried out, "Please, I need to ask you a question." He forced, "All right, but make it very quick," remembering that he needed to put on a good show to keep the herd motivated and content and draw in good spirits. Can someone without a quirk be a hero? Mighty Wolf paused at this. Not a written present? Was that even possible, given the number of spirits that had flooded the world since the incident? If the child somehow repelled them, that is. He leapt to the boy's location and took hold of his hand. Indeed, each finger had the same length as his. That was some very strong evidence, but it didn't prove anything. You have to be careful about passing off your powers as a quirk, he thought. It may be silly in this modern age, but the herd must still be unaware. You wouldn't be able to get through the schools, he replied honestly, but if you work hard, you'll eventually reach the point where you can try out as an adult. It's not easy, but it's been done before. The child exclaimed with excitement, "Do you really think so?" before he collapsed in despair. "But I already applied to UA." Since he didn't smell like a Uretha, the first change was unlikely to occur before the entrance exams and would likely take place over a month later. He was about to warn the boy about the perils of the path he was attempting to follow when he lost control of Dalu form. "I'm sorry, kid, that's the best I can tell you right now. Hero work is dangerous, and doing it without a quirk is even more so." Going back to Hishu, he was a sickly, injured, and frail man who couldn't motivate a fly to rotten meat, rather than a great, muscle-bound wolf man who could motivate all kinds of people when he could get them to overcome their spirit's disgust to him. The strong, self-assured face Izuku had known his entire life abruptly disappeared as he tried to comprehend what his hero had said, to be replaced by something that neither of those adjectives could possibly describe. He honestly questioned whether the man before him was eating enough. "Oh no, I broke you. I. He sighed and sat down, saying, "Calm down, kid. I'm fine, this is just a part of myself I don't let most of the world see. Listen, if you swear to tell no one, and I mean not a soul, not even those you trust the most, then I'll let you in on a secret. The herd must not know, but you won't be part of the herd forever." Izuku nodded enthusiastically to the idea of getting in some top secret, even though he didn't understand that last part at all. "You're not quirkless, no one is, you just have a special quirk." Izuku's expression fell. "Are you about to tell me that I have the quirk of heroic spirit, or humanity?" "No, let me put it in a simple way. The dawn of quirks isn't when quirks first came into existence, it's just when they became common in public knowledge, and when they dispersed so there were thousands of them. They used to belong to a select few, and they were kept hidden. They still keep themselves hidden. I actually have one of these quirks, though I've kept it a secret and in fact limited myself from using its full potential to avoid having too many questions asked, and no, before you ask I can't tell you more right now, not until it manifests, and by that I mean I think that you have it as well. Unfortunately, it won't develop until later in life. These original quirks weren't bound to the same, 4 to 6 years old, rule as the modern variants, and I have no way of knowing when. That's why I said you should go for the harder route of getting approved as an adult. Now, before you barrage me with a litany of questions, I have to go. If you want to find me again and learn more, meet me at Dagoba Beach every time the phase of the moon changes." The brand was applied to Tenko's skin, and he screamed. His rescuer attempted to comfort him by telling him that he was taking off his rahu, whatever it was. It was his auspice, which told him nothing at all, was the only explanation he received. After it was finished, he felt less irate. He was no longer filled with the almost supernatural rage that had once consumed him, but he was still upset at the world for what had happened to him. The man who had rescued him grinned courteously and said, "Now that that's taken care of, I suppose that many explanations are in order." He raised his hands as though to demonstrate his point, saying, "You bet there are. What the hell was that? Did I get a quirk? I thought I was quirkless, I had the same length fingers and everything." Then, recalling the sensation of their claws, he turned to face them and said, "I killed my family." Those who go through the first change under the full moon are blessed with the anger of a warrior, giving them the rage to take down their foes, or anyone who happens to be in their way. That is the gift of the bitch mother. He thought, my mother wasn't a bitch. She was just a coward, but he couldn't bring himself to mention it while he was still dealing with her death at his hands. I am not talking about your human mother, I am talking about Mother Luna, the mother of all Uretha. All of what the humans used to call werewolves. Izuku visited Dagoba Beach each time the moon changed phases, but he had no idea why. Indeed, it was to get a face-to-face look at Mighty Wolf, the great hero, but each time he just gave Izuku a sniff and said, "Not yet," or told him a ridiculous fairy tale. There were no upcoming details, only a mythological history lesson about two creatures named Father Wolf and Mother Luna, but he had been on the verge of believing the first story he had been told about a set of primordial quirks. Father Wolf, the greatest of the wolf spirits and the embodiment of the idea of a hunter, decided to serve as the spirit world's judge and hunt down any spirits that would misuse their position of authority without consequence. The greatest of the moon spirits, Mother Luna kept watch over everyone and changed with the moon's phases. The two fell in love. Izuku thought it was fascinating enough, and Mighty Wolf would occasionally lead him in combat skills exercises as they discussed it. Father Wolf was the ultimate predator, strengthening the spirit world by pursuing the cowardly and weak. Envious of his authority, Mother Luna devised a plan to woo him and seize the position for herself. Tenko was captivated by this story and felt that it somehow spoke to him. Together, they had 9 children. The 9th has been lost to history, and for good reason, Mighty Wolf said, spitting out the last 3 names in disgust. Winter Wolf the just leader, Red Wolf the curious, Death Wolf the investigator, Black Wolf the trickster, Blood Wolf the warrior, and Dire Wolf the bully, Rabid Wolf the insane, and Silver Wolf the incestuous. The man said to Tenko in a respectful tone, Dire Wolf the strong, Rabid Wolf the wise and honest, and Silver Wolf whose love was purest, before scornfully adding, Winter Wolf, the coddler of the weak, Red Wolf the ridiculous, Death Wolf the stupid, Black Wolf the coward, Blood Wolf the savage. For good reason, the 9th has been lost to history. They inherited the strength and predatory instincts of true hunters from their father. They inherited their mother's ability to change like the moon and developed the capacity to transform into humans so powerfully that they could mate and have children with regular people. The first werewolves would be those kids. Father Wolf grew older and weaker by the standards of spirits as time passed. His judgment became less certain and his decision-making less wise. Winter Wolf had a hunch it was time to assume his role. He appealed to 4 of his siblings and their children to help him topple their weakened alpha. However, as he gazed up at the full moon, Izuku couldn't help but feel something deep down, something primal, something itching to get out. In the end, it was nothing, so he returned to training while listening. Izuku had thought about the term werewolf before, but hearing it in reference to Mighty Wolf's quirk was truly absurd. The bitch mother was finally prepared to reveal her evil scheme. She deceived the naive Winter Wolf into assuming Father Wolf's authority for himself, and he amassed a following of weaklings who enjoyed his treatment of their kind. With the help of their own children, 5 of Father Wolf's own children attacked him, knocked him down, and permanently destroyed Hunter's paradise. The bitch mother expelled all 9 of her children from the paradise, which she was unable to sustain anyhow, after Rabid Wolf and Silver Wolf exposed her deceit. For thousands of years, the legitimate dominion of spirit over humanity was destroyed due to her manipulations, which caused the separation of the spirit and human worlds. The other 5 remained adamant in their conviction that they and their children had legitimately assumed Father Wolf's mantle to oversee the balance between the spirits and the humans, and they did so by oppressing the spirits and those of us who are pure of their crimes, who are not forsaken. Tenko was beginning to comprehend the epic battle between good and evil into which he had just been recruited, while Dire Wolf realized that he had been betrayed and that the destruction of Father Wolf was an evil that could never be forgiven. Mother Luna screamed in pain when Father Wolf was vanquished. She expelled them from the spirit world after becoming enraged that her husband had been murdered by their own children, and she then participated in tearing it apart. Although she didn't personally destroy it, Father Wolf's passing tore apart the spirit world and the human world, ruining the hunter's paradise. Not only did those involved in Father Wolf's death suffer, but Dire Wolf was expelled from his paradise, vowed to exact revenge on those responsible, and both Rabid and Silver Wolf held fast to a conspiracy theory that Rabid Wolf had made up on the spot that Mother Luna had orchestrated this whole thing. Mother Luna cursed all of us with a weakness to Silver after Silver Wolf failed in his attempt to kill her. Those who were forsaken by their crime of killing Father Wolf were not about to sit idly by. They understood that it was now their responsibility to shepherd and guide this new world, stopping aggressive spirits from harming the human world and vice versa. Although their attempts to make amends for their actions were commendable, Izuku wasn't sure if he thought the justification these Forsaken had offered for killing Father Wolf was in any way acceptable. "Are you a descendant of the Forsaken?" Izuku inquired, assuming this was the direction the story was meant to take. "Blood Wolf," he replied, "but it's a decision for contemporary Eurytha, and I decide to adopt the warrior's values." Mighty Wolf sat up and began sniffing him before Izuku could ask him any more questions about this myth. "You're closer than I thought," he muttered, "and you might actually change in time for the exams." Then, without any prior notice, he bit Izuku's hand. Izuku now smelled like a Uritha, which meant he might change within the month, and they continued to meet at the same time. The first change could occur at any time during the entire month, but it was always, apparently, on the first day that the moon changed phases. This would help him know where Izuku was at all times, apparently. His mother still didn't know that he was going to train and listen to fairy tales from a strange hero 5 nights a month, and she didn't need any more stress, especially given how she would react if he bit her son and told her all kinds of weird stories that he genuinely seemed to believe. Besides, he was beginning to believe the man's stories more and more, not because they were any less ridiculous, or even because being close to him had affected him, but because he was experiencing it on an internal level. The primal urge, the sudden awareness of the world around him. Something was happening to him, and if it meant that he was actually just like Mighty Wolf and not quirkless, then he sincerely hoped it was this first change he had been hearing about. When Mighty Wolf was late for their usual meeting one day on the first night of the half moon, Izuku began to notice all the trash that covered Daagba Beach and began to wonder why no one was fixing it. There were heroes everywhere, with all kinds of amazing powers, so why was this place left to fester and descend into chaos? He began to think about society as a whole and all the problems that exist. Seeing everything, he saw right and wrong. It was like the moon up there, half black and half white, perfectly balanced, with order and chaos, control and freedom, as society should be, but it wasn't. Why wasn't it? On the one hand, then, he was Izuku Midoriya, and he had every right to judge. As the moon shone down on him, this obsession with fixing some aspect of the universe became more and more apparent, and in order to cope with his agitation, he began picking up some of the trash. As he continued to do so, he became aware that he was not doing it quickly enough. He needed more power somehow, but how could he get more power? His obsessive dilemma was resolved when his bones and muscles twisted and shifted, forming a wolf. Not a wolf man like Mighty Wolf, but just a regular wolf. But this wouldn't do. Izuku turned back to a human, disregarding the fact that his clothes had been ripped apart by his transformation into a wolf, and continued to think about the situation, his sudden fixation on cleaning the beach taking his mind off the feat he had just accomplished. His fingers grew longer, fur sprouted all over his body, and his mouth opened out into a fang-filled maw as he, frustrated by the lack of an answer, began to grow until he resembled the more wolf form he had known Mighty Wolf could assume with serious villains. Without giving it any thought, he jumped toward the closest piece of trash and tore it apart, finding the experience unsatisfying. Their leader, Bakugo, was a little worried about how littering might affect his record, but he dismissed that as irrelevant as they continued walking until the howls caught up with them, which sounded like Mighty Wolf, but more feral and less heroic. A group of bored teenagers stopped by the beach to throw away their empty cans of soda, and even though Bakugo would never admit it later, it stopped them all cold. He had summoned this form because of his prey, which was litter on the beach. Humans were his prey because they left more litter on the beach. Bakugo himself had been preparing for this day for a long time. He was going to fight his first villain, even though it wasn't technically legal yet, and he was ready to show what he could do. His best toady didn't know what had hit him, or why his intestines were visible and on the outside of his body. His second best toady only recovered from his shock and paralysis by vomiting. Disregarding the plight of his friends, the brazen teenager detonated 2 explosions right where the massive wolf thing's shoulders appeared to be, presumably rendering it incapacitated but not killing it. This was the case for a good 3 seconds before the slightly burned and broken patches of flesh where the explosions had occurred started to mend themselves in front of his eyes. His shock prevented him from taking advantage of the 3 seconds he had given himself, and the fact that the wounds didn't stick didn't lessen the rage they cause. Bakugo was beginning to panic as the hideous wolf thing swung its claws toward him. His logical mind knew that it was just some strange idiosyncrasy, but a deep, instinctive part of him felt that this was wrong, that this was something that shouldn't exist, that hadn't existed, that he should be afraid of and then forgotten about once he was safe. Keituki Bakugo didn't intend to run, but whatever was going through his mind caused him to decide against it, which made him think slowly and hazily, the last thing he needed while this monster was tearing him to pieces. It felt good, in keeping with his sense of harmony, to deal with spirit matters again. Mighty Wolf was late, but it was hardly his fault. There had been a villain attack not far from his personal territory that, upon investigation, turned out not to be a villain attack at all, but rather some true ridden, acting like the spirit-controlled zombies from the days before the locust rendering and the dawn of quirks, which in this day and age meant they were seen as villains with quirks. So much so that, despite the fact that it was the first night of the half moon and that, to be honest, The boy seemed to have Elidoth tendencies. He completely expected to go over training in the actual world history, but as a precaution, he only reviewed what he remembered of typical Elidoth first changes. During the first change, an Elidoth should be obsessed with their new role, likely finding some arbitrary problem and obsessing over fixing it to dangerous levels, even to the point of violence against those who would prevent the fix. Elidoths were the judges of the werewolf society. They changed when Luna was half white and half black, so they had the ability to separate the black and white in the world around them. They also had a tendency to change quickly and without warning because the demands of the Elidoth position would constantly bombard their minds, making them dissatisfied with their form and searching for the right form, which eventually led to them becoming trapped in Garu. Even if he was going through the terrible experience of the first change, it shouldn't be nearly as violent as is stereotypical for werewolves who went through it without forsaken guidance, because Mighty Wolf had fortunately led Izuku to this beach in large part because no one ever approached it. Such thoughts were swiftly replaced by gratitude that his keen hearing meant that he was the first hero to respond to the civilians in question. Bakugo was actually tempted to run away with his second best toady, but he refrained from doing so because it would mean leaving his best toady to be killed by the monster, not because he cared about the boy, but because saving civilians would be crucial to his reputation as a hero, and he wasn't entirely indifferent to someone being dissembled without merit. Unfortunately, the strange effect in his head was still preventing coordinated movements, and even though he was, barely, dodging around it with little trouble, keeping the creature's attention on himself, he couldn't get a good hit in without putting himself at too much risk until Mighty Wolf arrived to save the day. Mighty Wolf barely had time to check Rahu's eye to see if he had the raw strength in Dalu form to defeat the less trained pup in Garu form after noticing that Izuku had already devolved in Garu form and mortally injured a child before he arrived. After concluding that they were fairly equal in raw strength, he charged in, caught Izuku's claws in his own, summoned the power of his dominance gifts, and issued the voice of command. Slow down. Go back to Hishu. Izuku's reaction could only be described as bewildered, which made Mighty Wolf curse inwardly as he realized the boy wouldn't understand what return to Hishu meant. Leave these children alone. The yells were aggressive and authoritative, and they were driven by the influences spirits held over the physical world. Hi, strong wolf. I am able to assist you. The boy who had been detonating bombs earlier attempted to enter. Take your pal to the hospital, he shouted back, not actually intending to use the voice of command but glad he did anyways. This was enough of a distraction for Izuku to rake his claws against Mighty Wolf's chest, drawing blood and cracking a bone. That would take several minutes to heal, he grimaced internally. Not devoting much thought to whether he should try dominance again, and invested his willpower into the gifts of strength, focusing his already impressive arms so that they could deliver forward force far greater than even his impressive physique would normally allow. Izuku was still too savage to properly block them, and he managed to shatter the boy's ribcage. That one could take up to an hour to heal. Now listen to me, he shouted, once more investing his essence into dominance. This did, sort of get through to the boy. They unfix the beach, and I fix. Did you intend to mention that you disemboweled the unfortunate boy for his littering behavior? To his astonishment, the Garu form shrank until Izuku stood there, naked and dazed, but he wasn't about to let the kid off the hook until he was in a state that allowed them to speak. In fact, it wasn't all that surprising of an action for a first change. What did I do? We'll need to get you some clothes, and maybe teach you the ritual for making your clothes vanish and reform when you change forms. The two sat down and spoke after Izuku had changed and moved far enough away from the area where police would be looking into his attack on the three boys. This is the initial shift. Almost never is it a pleasant experience. I had considered keeping you away from people during that time, but, well, mice and men have the best laid plans. Mighty Wolf pointed up at the moon and said, but I wasn't some animal with no control over my actions. I was so concerned about littering. He appeared to be about to throw up over what he had just done. You followed Mother Luna's instructions. Sort of. According to our mother, anyone who changes under the half moon should be able to judge right from wrong, understand all sides of a problem, and act appropriately. She was invading your personality with her own expectations, overriding your thought process. That won't go away, and your feelings will change as a result. Like all werewolves, you will experience anger on a deeper and more intense level, but as the auspice takes effect, your sense of right and wrong, and especially your desire to consider it, will be distorted and reinforced. Their job is to be constantly angry at anything that threatens them, so be relieved it wasn't the full moon. It is among the drawbacks of our way of life. In addition to your ability to heal quickly, acquire multiple forms, become stronger when your auspice moon is in the sky, and learn people's locations by tasting their blood. And that's not even counting the gifts. You also experience degeneration, more intense emotions, an urge to kill animals, and silver-induced pain. In addition to making people crazy when they see you in non-human or fully ordinary wolf form, people still argue over whether it's a gift or a curse in and of itself. The boy who fled, the third one, it's likely that he won't even recall this evening. The other two will continue to misremember details, and I have no doubt that they would be doubting whether any of it ever happened if it weren't for the aftereffects of that one boy's injuries. Since the locus rendering, it has become less common, but it still keeps us hidden. Although I put a lot of effort into getting rid of the lunacy effect, I would advise going for a more ostentatious gift instead of shapeshifting if you truly want to pass off your Uritha abilities as a quirk. The herd must not be aware of the truth, so don't attempt to explain it. Why? Since it's still in the Oath of the Moon, it's still sacred at this point, to be honest. He briefly lost himself in his thoughts. You're going to have to speak that soon, actually, but we'll let you settle into things, especially since you'll probably need some thought before joining a tribe. Looking up, Izuku, who had been enthusiastically recording all of this, said, "Tribe. Which of the 5 abandoned kids do you consider to be your tribal totem? In return for upholding the totem's ideal, it rewards you. As a blood talon, I am obligated to Bloodwolf." "You are an incredible hero," Izuku exclaimed. "I've always admired you. Like you, I aspire to be a Bloodwolf." "Hold on, child, you ought to consider your options first. Since you like my hero career, you have the right to make this choice, even though what I've seen of you seems to fit the Bone Shadows or Iron Masters better." Tenko had become proficient in Dalu, Han, and Urshu form very rapidly. Regretfully, he was always reminded of that first night when he attempted to battle Garu, which caused him to panic and either lose the form or lose control after assuming it. The man who was punishing him with the hot brands on his flesh as a form of retribution for his most recent failure also offered consolation. "Tenko, you're doing fine. I think you'll be ready to take the Oath of the Pure and join a tribe soon. All have trials to prove your worthiness, but first you must take on their oath. The fire-touched have one. Tell no lies, and allow no lies in your presence. The ivory claws have several, but the general gist is to keep yourself clean, not in the literal sense but in your behavior and level of refinement. The Predator Kings have 3, but all of them involve avoiding the ways of mankind in favor of the superior survival of the fittest nature of the wild. It is absolutely necessary that you undergo these trials and oaths. There is an initiation to prove your worthiness, but you have time and it's not really necessary to choose a tribe. The Ghost Wolf path has its drawbacks, to be sure, but it's not an invalid one. All 5 tribes have one oath added to the Oath of the Moon, based on their own bands. What they, as creatures more spirit than us, cannot do by their nature, we strive not to do. The blood talons, such as myself, will not offer a surrender that we would not accept. It is an insult to both your enemy and yourself to demand that they give up before they are beaten. Bone Shadows must pay each spirit in kind. When a spirit does wrong, it must be punished, while when it does right, it must be rewarded. While this seems like general behavior, the Bone Shadows treat it as a law. Hunters in darkness must keep their territory sacred. When you value something, when you claim as it yours, you have taken on a responsibility to it. To violate that and change your mind is to violate what the hunters in darkness view as the rightful natural order. Iron Masters must honor their territory in all things. When they claim a land, it is theirs, not only to preserve but to improve upon. And finally, the Storm Lords must not show weakness nor allow others to tend to their weakness. They are to be the leaders, or the ones who learn to wield power for the benefit of others, and they themselves cannot embrace, or even let others know about, a lack of it. It sounds like Hunters in Darkness and Iron Masters are the same in their outlook, Izuku said. Not at all, said Mighty Wolf. Hunters in Darkness believe in preserving the natural world, and keeping things from degrading, while Iron Masters believe in improving the natural world. Hunters in Darkness embrace the natural, while Iron Masters embrace the technical. Opting to follow preconceived notions, he added, and while Hunters in Darkness tend to emphasize being stealthy and using trickery, the Iron Masters emphasize being innovative and finding new ways to do things. But we can go into detail about the tribal philosophies later. Mighty Wolf was aware of another way, but he contemplated whether or not to tell Izuku about it. For the time being, we need to talk about essence. It's what fuels your spirit half, what fuels all spirits, and you need to learn how to ingest it. You get some whenever your auspicious moon is in the sky, but most of it comes from the loci, places where the barrier between the physical world and the spirit world is weak. The child wouldn't really use it anyhow. You'll have to ingest essence to keep your wolf nature functioning. You can harvest it from loci, where the spirit world is doing its best to take back the physical world from the filthy humans, or, in times of desperation, you can get it by consuming human flesh. Normal wolf flesh works too, but that's only as a last resort. Beyond how utterly disgusting it is, it has effects on your soul. Tenko cast a disapproving glance at himself. Yeah, you mentioned that. Degeneration, I think you called it. What is up that? It's both the natural state of someone who can't accept what they are and a curse amplified by the bitch mother. If you do things at clear odds with your werewolf nature, or reject your human nature entirely, then your mind will start to fade. You'll start to become like a spirit, thinking in terms of influence and arbitrary bans on your behavior. A little degeneration is natural, even to be sought. It means that you're willing to do what has to be done. When you suffer from too much, you can go about resolving it the long way by understanding yourself or take the sacred act of penance, burning away your weakness and mistakes through suffering and self-inflicted pain. But we'll go over that in a bit. For now, you should see the spirit world, and eat essence in the normal way. So, what are spirits anyway? I mean, I've heard the word, but how do they work? Spirits are the rightful rulers of the world, born of the spiritual energy that surrounds it. They form, then feed upon the weakest of them as nature demands, then grow and eventually embrace a concept, like an idea, an object, an animal, you name it, and then develop power based on how the world understands the concept. The Forsaken try to keep balance between the spirits and the humans, ignoring that humanity has already tipped the balance so far in their favor that most of the world doesn't even know spirits exist. Even when spirits gift them with power, they call them quirks, and come up with nonsensical explanations for their origins. It's important to learn to embrace the spirits, to work with the ones who are helpful to our cause, and even to praise them in ways that the ignorant might call worship. Many will gladly grant you power, though at a steep cost. Remember their grandeur, but be careful with them. Izuku was shown an old, deserted shrine by Mighty Wolf, which he recognized as an old religious structure that had long since been converted into a tourist attraction. It served as something of a cornerstone in his neighborhood. As he gazed, he now experienced a strange sensation. Something seemed to be buzzing in his ears, urging him to eat so that he could get power there. This is a loci. The significance humans put on the place, or once did, attracted the energies of the spirits until it started creating essence, the substance upon which spirits feed. The energy gathered here attracts spirits who want its essence, weakens the barrier separating the spirit world and the physical world so that, on occasion, free spirits can show up in our world without riding a human, and gives us Yuritha the power to fuel our gifts and other strange abilities. Izuku managed to sputter out, riding a human? In reality, he had 1,000 questions, but for some reason, that one prevailed and entered the world. Mighty Wolf gave a nod. I already told you, spirits are the real source of quirks. In the olden days, spirits would try to take over human bodies, altering their personalities and mutating them in various supernatural ways, creating monsters that we referred to the Ridden. During the time you call the dawn of quirks and we call the locus rendering, billions of spirits flooded the world for reasons I still don't know, but, instead of claiming territory or turning humans into their puppets as would be expected, they simply bonded with humans, resting inside of them and granting them influences and sometimes enforcing their bans in the human's behavior. Before you ask, influences are the general terms for the ability of spirits to alter the world around them, and bans are like rules that are encoded into a spirit. All spirits have them, like, never hurt an animal, or, never pass by a window without tapping the wall 3 times or anything of that nature, and they're physically incapable of breaking them. Izuku was engrossed in Mighty Wolf's explanation and actually intended to ask that question, but he was primarily sidetracked by the notion that this was the true reason behind all peculiarities. It did, in fact, explain a great deal. This concept of bans appeared to explain away some of the more strange flaws and restrictions he had observed, as well as how quirks could have such diversity and fit into themes that couldn't possibly adhere to any natural law. Then he became troubled by something. You say that they should be turning people into puppets or monsters. Are spirits evil? Should we be scared of the fact that they are inside of all of us? Mighty Wolf let out a sigh. Short answer, no, they're not evil. The thing is, they aren't human, not even partly human like you and me, and they don't think like humans. Their idea of right and wrong, or what's reasonable, or even fun and amusing, is their own, and it's completely alien to how you or any of your peers would think. To a storm spirit, knocking down a building is a necessary part of growing up and showing how strong it is. To a war spirit, fermenting conflict is its calling. To a rat spirit, Reality itself is something to be gnawed on and chewed through. Their normal behavior can be dangerous to us, and it is part of your duty as a Eurytha to make sure that they do not cause undue harm while doing so. He exhaled. Of course, they may seem like enemies more often than friends to you. As for all of their strange behavior and ideas, one thing they have in common with humans is that they don't like being told what to do. Izuku yelled resolutely, "I want to do it, I want to face this challenge." Good, because you don't really have a choice. Ignoring your heritage and trying to pass yourself off as human, even just to yourself, will eventually lead to degeneration. What is that, exactly? It's supposedly what happens when you fail to accept either your wolf or your human half. You become aggressive, violent, unable to care about anything but your closest friends, and eventually not even them. Too much for too long, and you become all but a spirit, developing a ban and unable to think in terms that humans would understand. Those with no degeneration are held as the wisest and most respected among the Forsaken, at least, but most suffer a small amount. There's no shortcut to dealing with it, just understanding that you must embrace your wolf instincts and duties without abandoning your human mores and ideals. There are rumors that you can also fix it by torturing yourself, but I wouldn't encourage that even if I thought it was true. Now, how about I show you the spirit world? Despite the instructions' apparent absurdity, Tenko followed them. Feel your primal urge, burrow deep, and then step sideways without shifting your feet. Though he should have screamed in exasperation at the instruction manual's ambiguity and lack of value, he felt that it contained some intuitive truth that he understood on a basic, if not intellectual, level. The world around him began to change after he spent about 30 seconds feeling himself, accepting the animal inside of him, and imagining himself leaving reality. The buildings distorted, assuming dimensions that were not possible in architecture, some of them forming faces and communicating with one another. Many of them disappeared completely. An enormous rat was devouring one nearby street. When Tenko turned to face it, it screamed back at him, its eyes staring into his with a shrewdness that a rat shouldn't possess. It somehow made the face of a shady politician or used car salesman, and it even rubbed its hands together as if it were proud of a trick it was about to perform. The light from a nearby lamppost, or at least one in the real world, changed into a mass of electricity before it could carry out its intended action. The electricity then leapt down and devoured the rat as if it were a living thing. Tenko noticed the odd occurrence and realized that, more or less, that was what had actually occurred. An electricity spirit had just killed and absorbed a rat spirit, most likely as a result of some internal struggle he would never be able to comprehend. The scene was viewed with approval by his mentor, who had been following him without his knowledge. The electricity spirit turned to face the two, glimmering in what appeared to be a greeting. Just as in the natural world, strong spirits rule over and kill weak spirits, as it should be for all beings. The spirits respect the pure, for they know that we wish to restore Pangaea, when they ruled over existence. This does not mean that they are reliable allies, and certainly aren't slaves. You still have to earn their respect to gain their gifts. He gestured to the scarlet marks that had spread across his body after entering the spirit world. This is renown. It shows you what the spirits think of your deeds. As you grow stronger, you'll need to perform feats to gain it so that the spirits can be persuaded to share their secrets, but for now just being among the pure should be enough. He shouted in the first tongue, calling to the electricity spirit. As it materialized in front of Tenko, it chattered excitedly and blasted him with a slight but noticeable wind. The electricity spirit laughed at him, the bastard, as his hair flew around his face and he balled his fists in frustration. He was filled with images that didn't make sense at the time, but for the moment, they made him raise his hand, hold it forward, and call forth a fierce wind. You've learned a simple weather gift, and after only the tiniest bit of instruction, impressive. Izuku took a long time to learn how to step sideways. He recognized the primal urge, for he felt something inside of himself that had not existed prior to the first change, but he was unable to access it. Mighty Wolf maintained that it was because he was constantly overanalyzing and studying the idea, whereas entering the spirit world was a matter of intuition and gut instinct. Let me just make another go at my notebook, maybe I'm missing something. No, yelled Mighty Wolf. As I keep telling you, you can't just intellectualize this. Or, if you must think on your desire to be a hero. Think on what you did on the night of your first change, how you understood the concept of right and wrong, and acted on it without the slightest bit of thought. Think about how heroes often run into danger without even realizing that their feet were moving until after the fact. Understand that, and you will understand the primal urge. Understand the primal urge, and you will understand how to step sideways. Disturbed by its impact on him, Izuku gazed up at the half-moon. No, this was correct. This was incorrect. False. Correct. False. Correct. What was he to judge? He needed to check it out. His desire to see and evaluate the spirit world firsthand was overwhelming, and he succeeded in doing so. He felt his legs take a step, but they didn't move, and he was suddenly on a new Dagoba beach, propelling him in a direction he hadn't even known existed until now. Despite the name, it wasn't sideways. In addition to the sand, there were multiple swirling masses of sand that were joking and playing with each other. Where there had been trash in the real world, there were now squelching masses of some greenish mess that made Izuku sick just by looking at it, and huge flies that were bloated and hideous beyond belief. He turned away from it and was confronted by a blackness of some kind. It was dark, cold, and drained everything in its path. Izuku started to question his interest in it as he gazed at it. He questioned why he should care about anything at all. After all, the world would continue without him, so why not just ignore it? Indeed, he ought to give up and remain here. Mighty Wolf tore the thing to pieces with his claws. With his clarity restored, Izuku yelled, "What was that?" An apathy spirit, probably attracted by the neglect that the general populace shows to this beach. You know, your Elidoth instincts might not have simply been going haywire when they made you freak out about the litter. I think the state of this place is negatively affecting the spirit world. It surprises me that I never noticed before. Regardless, this is the spirit world. Be careful, it's a dangerous place. While you won't run into Maelgin like that very often, spirits in general tend to not like Forsaken, for the reasons I went over earlier. This is generally a risk if you don't have the renown to convince a spirit to teach you a gift. You keep mentioning gifts, Izuku wrote, but what are they exactly? The moon interrupted him before he could finish his question. In pictures, not words. It essentially reiterated what it had told him on his first change. See the truth, see the black and white, and distinguish between right and wrong. However, it also gave him knowledge about how spirits could change the world. He became adept at spotting lies. By reading every clue and body language and determining whether they were being duped right away, he was able to comprehend how Illumin, the spirit of the half-moon, assessed the world. He also comprehended every other emotion. By simply connecting with his essence, the energy that drove his spiritual form, he was able to see people in a way he had never been able to before. It came naturally. That was the only rational way he could justify what was happening to him right now, but it was. What the spirit of the half-moon had just given him was intended for him. He could now see why it was called a gift. Izuku stared at Mighty Wolf, embracing the information that had just flooded his mind and using it to determine whether or not his mentor was telling the truth, even though it made him feel uncomfortable. He wasn't. Sincerity, concern, and pride were among the energies that Izuku saw, though he was unsure of how he was able to read them. He shed a few tears at that last one because he didn't believe anyone could be proud of him. Mighty Wolf frantically asked, "Izuku, what's wrong?" As if he didn't understand the meaning of his tears. "I just received a gift from the moon here, and it let me know what you were really thinking about me. Are you actually proud of me?" "Well, yeah, you've taken to this better than I could have hoped for. Sure, you almost killed that boy, but that's not uncommon. Hell, the fact that there were no casualties whatsoever puts you above a lot of new werewolves, and thus far you've been quick to grasp everything I've told you. While I can't use half-moon gifts, I think I've heard of this one, and yeah, you can trust what it tells you." He scratched his chin in amazement as he looked around. "Maybe you could pass this off as your quirk. I use my Dalu and Garu form as my official one, and am careful to only use gifts that aren't visibly different from them, mostly from the lists of dominance and strength. You seem to be more suited to tactical fighting, using intellect and trickery to take down your opponents rather than raw strength, so other gifts might be preferable to you, and just trying to pass it all off as your own quirk might bring too much attention from too many parties. The herd must not know, after all, and even if they don't suspect anything, other werewolves that realize what you are won't be happy about you even creating the opportunity." His message eventually reached Izuku, but he was too overcome by his feelings to fully comprehend it. "So, this or shapeshifting will be my quirk? But I'm already registered as quirkless, and I have the fingers and everything." "Change your registration, pass it off as an anomaly. The truth is that mortal scientists know so little about quirks that anomalies like this happen all the time. You'll barely even be studied. More importantly, I wouldn't recommend using shapeshifting as your quirk, unless you want to stick to Urshu, the form of the normal wolf. I already explained lunacy to you, and it took me years of practice before I could take this form in public without inducing it. I would either stick to the gift you just learned or try to pass off your quick healing as one. That latter would even make the years of thinking you were quirkless make sense. You could just pass it off as never getting injured enough for your quirk to work." He nodded to himself, calm enough to consider a word Mighty Wolf had just thrown out. What's a Mailgen? Izuku was frightened when the great hero blanched. Listen kid, spirits are born from what we might call, more for lack of a better term than accuracy, magical energy, which, after taking shape, embraces a concept understood by humanity and forms its identity around that concept. That's why, for example, animal spirits typically have personalities that you would see their kind of animal having in a normal fairy tale. The thing is, if there are limits to what concepts they can embrace, I don't know them, and that includes concepts like, well, apathy, and hatred, and rape, and sadism. Mailgen is an old term for what one might call evil spirits, since while philosophically you could say they can't really be evil, and are just embracing their nature, these ones in particular have natures that, rather than simply cause problems due to having a completely incompatible thought process and value system to human society, their thought process and value system is to actively make things worse for humanity, as it's their own understanding of the concept they shaped around. The wind was flowing around Tenko because he was enjoying himself too much. But apparently spirits were pretty frugal and required even their pure saviors to prove themselves before granting more than the most basic of powers, which was a shame that he couldn't do more with it yet. His enjoyment was making his master impatient. He cut the pup off after a few minutes of Tenko destroying objects to entertain himself. I will give you another month to settle on a tribe, he said. But, having already been approved by the spirits, I think that it's time to speak the oath of Father Wolf. Even though Izuku was eager to explore more of this intriguing new world he had just been introduced to, Mighty Wolf repeatedly warned him about its dangers and insisted that they should return to the real world once one more crucial task was finished. It's time to say the oath of the moon. Before Mighty Wolf spoke in the first tongue, the two of them looked straight at the moon. Taku's Urim. Then he translated, the wolf must hunt, with assistance. As wolf spirits, it is our duty to hunt our prey, which for us means the spirits that would break the balance and those who make the world worse. They're our prey. We are not to cower and let others take care of it, and only take a peaceful solution if it's truly the best option available. When violence is necessary to uphold the natural order, it is our duty as Uritha to deal it out. Tenko tried to reflect on the lessons he had learned and what his spirit instincts sort of translated for him after listening to his mentor speak in the first tongue. When his mentor congratulated him, he smiled after he pondered, the wolf must hunt. He asked what that meant, glancing at the effigy of Father Wolf they had carved for this purpose, buried underground and far from the moon. Exactly what it sounds like. You are a wolf, and you must go out and hunt. Both animal prey and, when absolutely necessary, human. This is not just for food. The most important prey is, in fact, the Forsaken. Imru nu fur Imru. The people do not murder the people. So, don't kill anyone? That's really good. I was admittedly getting a bit nervous about that whole necessary violence part. Mighty Wolf let out a sigh. He had no desire to repeat the hundreds of arguments the Forsaken had engaged in over the true meaning of this. By people, it's normally understood that this means that we don't kill other werewolves, and that seems to be the pattern. Those who killed other Uritha, even with good reasons, including self-defense, suffer from degeneration in a way that doesn't seem to happen with humans. This is actually where hero training might do you some good, as learning how to fight and subdue your enemies without killing them might keep your soul safe. Nufur Angesha Angesha. The pure do not murder the pure. Tenko gave a nod. We don't kill our allies, that makes sense. There's a little more to it than that. You do not kill another follower of Rabid Wolf, Silver Wolf, or Dire Wolf even if they truly deserve it, even if they have become an enemy in all ways except outright joining the Forsaken. The chains of Mother Luna already punish us when we kill the awful Forsaken, so we must be careful of the suffering induced by turning on our own. Mock ne si. Si mock. The low honor the high respect the low. Gazing down at Izuku, Mighty Wolf hoped that the boy's contemporary sensibilities wouldn't make things too difficult. The life of a Uritha affects your mindset, and one of those effects is to afford you a certain respect for hierarchy. Because of that, actively fighting against the hierarchy that governs werewolf society causes only problems. When a Uritha is above another Uritha, including yourself, you are to afford that position the greatest respect. Izuku gave a tense nod. Still, that does not mean you're a slave. If by some means you manage to reach the top of that hierarchy, you must always remember that this is a responsibility to command others, not a privilege. You should only be afforded that respect if you care for those beneath you. CC mock. After a few seconds of a bewildered and fruitless attempt at translation, Tenko sputtered out, down honors up? The low honor the high, he was told by his mentor. Those who lead the Uritha do so through strength of will, and you must understand that at all times. The strongest get the best cut of meat, the most honors for the pack, and the right to command. If you don't like being among the low, stop whining and prove that you're strong enough to be among the high. Understanding this is sacred to functioning within our society. Daha ni. Honor your prey. As I told you earlier, you must hunt. There are those that must be targeted by your violence, but that does not mean you have the right to hurt others in the name of the greater good and call it a day. You must understand them, know why you are hunting them, and only give them what they truly deserve. Never rape or degrade. Never torture unless you think it's necessary to gain information or teach them a lesson. Never hold back your strength with the intention of showing how much greater you are than your opponent. That last one was a quick course correction for him. That doesn't mean you shouldn't hold back for other considerations, like keeping your true power a secret from the world. Luo Uritha Safal Thil. Werewolves shall cleave to humans. Basically, when your mating instincts take control and you start looking for a woman in your life, find a human. Things happen when a werewolf mates with another. Some say it's a curse wrought on us to ensure that we keep to our duties, or to remind us of the importance of good breeding. Others say it's because all werewolves are technically siblings, and thus mating is an abomination. Regardless, if you happen to stumble on a female werewolf in your career, don't have sex with her. Izuku was as curious as usual as to why, but for once he was unable to ask any questions because of how casually his hero raised such a sensitive subject. His cheeks were a vivid shade of red. If you do, she'll give birth to what's called anahar. They're a strange type of spirit, one that always tries to kill its parents and hates the Forsaken in general. That only made him feel less uneasy because it gave him something else to be concerned about. Oh, and even though you can physically can, it's also understood that you don't mate with normal wolves. As far as I know, that's just a problem because it's disgusting. After an unexpectedly lengthy pause, Tenko's mentor proceeded to explain the oath. In many ways, our oath parallels the oath of the moon that the Forsaken take. At this point, they take an utterly worthless one, so it's a bit of a tradition to wait in silence to spit on it. Anyway, the next words are Angusha Safal Thil Luo. The pure shall cleave to humans. When a werewolf and a human have sex, they have a chance of making a werewolf, or more likely an otherwise normal human that has the potential to sire werewolves in their own future. When two werewolves have sex, they create dark spirits that seek the deaths of their mothers and, if not treated carefully, their fathers and then all Uritha in general to a lesser extent. There's no need to waste our numbers like that, and it's also a crime by our own laws. Even raping Forsaken women to plague our enemies with these spirits, as has sometimes been done in the past, will require levels of penance that the most agony-obsessed Ivory Claw would balk at. He went on once he was certain Tenko had taken this in. And don't go into Ushu form and screw a normal wolf. That's just wrong. Uren nu Huuzu. Do not eat the flesh of man or wolf. Mighty Wolf noticed that Izuku appeared ill while translating this one and grinned. Yeah, this is pretty straightforward, and an easy one to follow when all is said and done. A tiny part of him still questioned whether he should tell the child the reasons why Uritha might be tempted to do so, but he reasoned that doing so would only make the child feel disgusted and horrified. Uren nu Huuzu. Tenko tried his hand at translating. Do not eat our cousin's meat. Close. Do not eat the flesh of our relatives, would be more accurate. In this case, that means humans and mundane wolves. As I told you before, eating freshly killed human or wolf meat can give you a lot of essence in a short time, but it should only be done when truly desperate, when you can afford degeneration and already have a plan for penance. I'm sure you think it's disgusting now, but once you've gotten a taste you'll find it more tempting than you might expect. Long pork, as we used to call it, is a rush, getting all of that essence so easily, and hard to stop once you start. Remember this oath before continuing if you do. Githel nu Bath. The herd must not know. I've given you this statement a few times already, to explain why we have to keep it a secret. And this is kind of why. It's still part of the oath of the moon, even after quirks have made us less unusual, and less prone to being killed by angry mobs of witch hunters are freaking out the world with our strangeness, we still have to keep humanity from learning the full extent of what we are and what we do. It does make sense on some level. This part of the oath was always to keep werewolves protected from humans more than the other way around, and humanity is only more dangerous than they were before quirks, and probably more importantly than us would be the potential fallout for the spirit world if people learn that that's where quirks actually come from. We are supposed to protect them from humans as well, after all. Then on top of that we still induce lunacy when we shapeshift. There are a lot of reasons to think that maybe this one is a bit outdated, but there are plenty of reasons to keep to it, as well, not the least of which is that you'll still suffer degeneration from violating it. Githel new bath. The herd must not know. It's a simple enough concept to understand. We keep our existence secret from the ignorant general public because they might try to stop us from restoring the spirit world's dominance. Humans, for all of their inferiority, can be dangerous, especially since the dawn of quirks let them steal spirit's power without them realizing it. Deception, for now, is one of our greatest weapons against them. There's one more vow, but you will only take it after you've chosen a tribe. I will get you more detailed information on the tribes when I can. Think on this seriously. Although you can change tribes later, there are penalties. The 5 Forsaken children do not look kindly upon werewolves that don't know themselves. Of course, the path of the ghost wolf is still open to you, but that has consequences too. There are 2 more, then the tribal vows, but those last ones won't be relevant until you choose a tribe. Atone for all transgressions, and refuse thy mother despite the costs. You must seek penance at all times. Doing what needs to be done causes degeneration, so going through the painful purification of penance is to be expected at all times. Do not get so caught up in doing the right thing to defeat the Forsaken that you forget this. The second simply reminds you that, although the Forsaken gain a few benefits from their continued slavery to the bitch mother, you must not become tempted by it. Reject your auspice, reject Mother Luna, and reject all that the Forsaken stand for. Izuku decided to register his quirk as rapid healing after giving it some thought. On the surface, a wolf transformation might have seemed the most practical for battle, and the ability to detect lies was undoubtedly useful, but he was aware that getting hurt had always been a major issue with allowing the quirkless to enter with the heroes, and this would eliminate any awkward questions the unaware herd might have about his relationship to Mighty Wolf. When he began to take fighting seriously, he discovered that it was a greater advantage than one might imagine. Fear of injury was the reason behind many of the limitations people placed on themselves during combat, particularly the ones most people were unaware they were putting on themselves. However, because of his apparent ancestry, that was much less of an issue. It wasn't that he was unbeatable, as Mighty Wolf would undoubtedly remind him constantly, but rather that ripped muscles and fractured bones were less of a hindrance than a disability. This allowed him to move farther, strike more forcefully without fear of retaliation, strike outward with less concern for maintaining his defenses, and simply accomplish more by learning to control his pain and survival instincts. To his mentor's horror, he spent as much time in the weeks leading up to UA's entrance exam learning to ignore his body's natural reaction to the actions he was performing as he did learning martial arts. Kid, I know what you're doing, and I've done it myself when in a sticky situation, but going this route has consequences, even for us. I can't use my full power, and I'm fighting people who've gotten used to using their quirks, ridden gifts, over the whole course of their lives. I've got to use what I can to its fullest potential, he responded. All good and true, but don't come whining to me when someone comes at you with a silver sword and you've taught yourself to overcommit and not dodge. Izuku let out a frustrated sigh. Is there anything else that can help? I mean, I noticed that my sense of smell is stronger even in Hishu, so maybe I can call on some of my strength without transforming. That requires a gift, and those aren't something you can just learn, not after what your auspice already taught you. A gift of strength would be invaluable, I use them after all, but finding a spirit that knows it and is willing to teach you. Wait, you know how to use it. Then why don't you teach me? He scratched the back of his head, Mighty Wolf. It's not that simple. Kid, do you remember learning that half-moon gift you know? Why don't you try and explain how it was taught to me, right now, just from memory? Izuku started to do that, but then he realized he couldn't. Translating the experience out of his mind and into words he could understand, he recalled the ordeal as easily as if it had happened a minute ago, and he doubted he would ever forget it. I just saw the world as the half-moon sees it, and I understood, somehow. Mighty Wolf gave a nod. Exactly. Spirits know how to make sense of it and share it, but our human halves mean that we tend to get a bit stuck. I could teach you a right, if I knew any, but gifts are beyond me to share. As though he had just had an idea, Mighty Wolf snapped his fingers. He abruptly fled without telling his protege anything, and Izuku sighed and followed his scent. Actually, I do know a right, or of one, even if I can't use it myself. But with half-moon gifts, you could, he said. Eventually, They discovered an old shack full of strange trinkets, most of which appeared to be Hollywood spoofs of Native American culture, but Mighty Wolf assured him that they were actually artifacts that could have enormous power over the spirits in the hands of those who knew how to use them, people who, regrettably, weren't in the immediate area. After searching through all of them, he finally produced a piece of black chalk, drew a circle around Izuku, chanted a line in the first tongue, and then sprayed the boy's eyes with chalk dust. The young man yelled, "What the hell?" as he futilely attempted to wash the substance away, but his mentor merely said, "Come with me," and escorted him out into the streets until they encountered other individuals. Mighty Wolf asked, "Use the gift of the half moon to see those people," and Izuku, still groggy-eyed and annoyed, grudgingly obeyed. He was aware of their feelings in general. A man was worried that his wife would learn of his liaison with the secretary, and the wife was appreciative of her husband's sudden focus and renewed energy after he hired his new secretary, but he also noticed something that he somehow translated as adhesion gaffling, influence, adhesion, ban, may not touch glass, and lamppost gaffling, influence, light, technology, revelation, ban, may not peacefully spend 3 hours without being able to see. The wife asked the husband if he could carry more items by using his quirk to attach them to his arms as they strolled and conversed, making sure that nothing was made of glass this time. They both laughed when he made the corny remark that he would only do it if she would use her quirk to light up their bags as though she lighted up his world. Izuku asked, "I can see their quirks. If it worked properly, you can see the spirits that power their quirks. It will take a while before you can garner any useful information from it, but with your analytical mind I bet you'll soon know most of your peers' quirks better than they know their own." However, Mighty Wolf was correct about its potential utility, and besides, Izuku really wanted to learn more about this world he had become a part of, and what better way to do that than to see what the spirits that gave people their quirks were really like. The effect only lasted a few hours, drained some of his essence, and required Izuku to smear more of that black chalk stuff over his eyes, which was apparently not easy to make in the first place. Unfortunately, he didn't have much time to think about this development because UA's entrance exams were approaching and he needed to prepare for battle if he wanted to pass. He was eager to see past the faint blur in his vision and investigate what spirits were residing in his prospective future classmates, despite his intense concentration on combat skills over the past few days. He could see concept, rank, influences, bands, and occasionally noumena and vassalage with this chalk smeared into his eyes, if the spirit could not resist. Some did. To his dismay, Bakugo was among the first prospective classmates he saw. He appeared somewhat shaken but resolute. Flare juggling, influence, explosives, fire, rage, ban, may not touch dry skin, noumena, blast, emotional resonance. Although Bakugo had always believed that his perspiration was explosive, the spirit riding him actually needed to be drenched in sweat in order to use its powers. It seems that he had the ability to quietly influence people's feelings, most likely without them even noticing. Izuku pointed out that it might include his own. Was this the cause of everyone's constant fear? Did they simply react to his spirit without realizing that it had nothing to do with his quirk and that they were being impacted? Even though Mighty Wolf had already sort of forgiven a lot of people when he explained that they would be inclined to dislike him because the spirits within sensed that he was Forsaken, apparently one of the reasons why most of the Forsaken had withdrawn from humanity at large, though Mighty Wolf was always vague on that topic, a part of him didn't want to excuse anyone's actions in that way. A part of him was intrigued by the possibilities, and if that was the reason why he and everyone else couldn't help but feel what Kachan seemed to want them to, he tried to find out what other spirits were present while ignoring the possibility for the time being. Stealth gaffling, influence, stealth, sight, ban, may not cease working. He wasn't looking at anyone, so he was a little confused by that one until he noticed the boots walking on their own and realized he was staring at an invisible girl. Tyranny incarnate, influence, dominance, willpower ban, cannot see those who have not conversed with it, noumena, gifts of dominance. Izuku was completely taken aback by that one for two reasons. Since they were by definition more powerful than the average person, he had anticipated seeing a lot of juggling among his classmates. But an incarnate, the ones Mighty Wolf once asserted were worshipped as gods by primitive man. And one connected to tyranny, so was he a Maelgen. What would other people think? Would he have been unnaturally frightening to their spirits? Would he have influenced the physical world by drawing bad energy from the spirit world? Izuku asked the boy in a desperate attempt to quench his curiosity, but his target likely found it impolite and perplexing. If he wanted to get into UA, he had to take the entrance exams, so he was stuck going through the motions. He'd always been above average, so the written part was easy enough. He was particularly concerned about the combat section. He actually felt fine as it got closer. The idea of engaging in combat and demonstrating his abilities in front of others made him feel energized. A growl was building inside him. Izuku suspected he may have howled in anticipation if he hadn't actively repressed the urge. He was unable to control it when the pro-hero Present Mic himself arrived and inquired about the students' readiness for the occasion. The antechamber echoed with a boisterous noise that was oddly reminiscent of a wolf, and Izuku found himself the focus of attention for all the students. Present Mic's efforts to lighten the mood had apparently elicited no response from anyone else, and they were somewhat perplexed and irritated. And disgusted, though he had a sneaking suspicion that they were unaware of the true cause. It's all right, Izuku, you'll succeed because modern Ridenoran isn't heavily impacted by their spirits. Well, it's nice to see someone get excited, Present Mic said in an attempt to defuse the tense situation in the room. He went on to outline the guidelines for the practical exam, stating that they would be up against a number of machines composed of soft metal that would be difficult for a human with a little more strength to break apart with effort, but still challenging for those who hadn't been practicing their fighting techniques at all. After all, you had to have some potential to be accepted into UA. Izuku overcame his nerves to look at Present Mic with interest after a boy stood up and reprimanded the hero for only informing them about 3 different kinds of robots when the pamphlet apparently showed 4. When their host told the class that the 4th kind of robot was worth 0 points and should not be worried about, it was not because he had changed physically but rather because of what his half-moon gifts demonstrated. The man was lying. His aura flared as he spoke, visible only to Izuku. It was as interesting to watch as it was to wonder what he might be lying about, since I had surprisingly little experience seeing such things. The not something to be concerned about aspect of the Eladoth gift was probably what excited people about it, as it didn't seem fair if the system provided prospective students with false information about earning points. That was definitely something to remember for the future. As the prospective students got ready to see if they were deserving or not, Nedzu was already using one eye to grade the written exams while looking at the fields. It would normally be easy to keep track of both, but right now he was a little preoccupied. 4 late bloomers were arriving at the school, based on their files. In this day and age, when his fellows from all over the gauntlet never failed to find a human they couldn't ride, late bloomers were uncommon in general. He was certain of the true cause of their peculiar condition. He sighed and questioned himself. Nedzu would have sworn that he had long since reconciled with the Forsaken, realizing that despite their occasional rudeness, they did have some worth and that the pure's psychotic dreams, no matter how wonderful they appeared to the average spirit, could bring little good. He was no ordinary spirit, the only Beshalu to escape the grip of his original form. He was more knowledge spirit than rat spirit due to his consumption habits, and he knew that if the hunter's paradise hadn't been restored by the locus rendering, the only things that could have happened would be more terrible than the Maelgen Incarnate's worst nightmares, and he didn't want anything to do with it. No longer. Nevertheless, he couldn't help but stifle a shudder of disgust as he gazed upon these 4 potentials, 1 Izuku Midoriya, 1 Koji Koda, 1 Yuga Aoyama, and 1 Jirota Shinshida. 2 remind me of Mother Luna. The Puriso hardly ever attempt to visit here, which is odd. He wondered why that might have diverted his attention long enough to clear his head and return to mentally evaluating UA's upcoming 2 classes. Present Mic might have been lying about whatever was happening with the 0-pointer, but he wasn't lying about the soft metal that could be broken by someone with slightly above average strength, if they didn't mind getting bruises and having pieces of wiring stab them in the hand. Since other students didn't trust their hands to heal in seconds, they probably weren't throwing otherwise normal punches with no preparation for impact resistance. As a result, they weren't hurt nearly as much as Izuku was when he attacked, but it didn't stop him from getting hurt like a bitch despite what other students were doing. He was furious and focused on getting to the next one, but he stopped when he felt something familiar. Like the Locust Mighty Wolf had previously shown him, it seemed as though something was speaking to him and making him feel at home. Was there another one close by? Present Mic realized that it didn't matter unless it could help him with the exam, as the same boy who had reprimanded him earlier flew by, destroying 3 robots in less time than it had taken him to destroy 1. Perhaps it could, he thought, concentrating on finding more to fight. Since no one would be around to witness him, He could use Dalu form to harm these robots in the spirit world if they had spirit reflections. But what good would that do? He believed that there was a way he could use this, even though it wouldn't get him accepted if no one could tell that he was the one destroying the robots, and that was assuming he could even do anything to them from across the gauntlet. He hoped his brain would figure it out quickly as he prepared himself for the agony of punching into another fake metal monster. He could only cut and bruise his fingers so much. They might accept everything that was offered, but his attitude toward them was still a different matter. Under the new moon, Kota changed. It was only natural to feel the need to hide. One could argue that his disposition was a perfect fit for the Iraka. Unfortunately, the tribe his family had been a part of for as long as its lineage produced Uratha didn't share his fear, no matter how well it matched his auspice. Instead of sitting and flinching, a hunter in darkness should wait in the shadows until the time was right, then attack. Only the part about waiting in the shadows was acceptable to Kota. He had no idea why Black Wolf had taken him in. Indeed, he had escaped detection during his initiation ceremony, but only because he was terrified of his mother and uncle and their appearance as wolves, and he didn't want to approach them anymore. Using the nature gift he had received from Black Wolf's vassals for passing initiation, he instinctively called out to a flock of nearby birds, "Protect me." They surrounded him and did their best to keep a particularly aggressive robot away from him, but they were only able to make small dents in its metal with their beaks. In an attempt to control his nervousness, Kota summoned the gifts of the new moon to locate the robot's weak spot and instructed his alleged companions to peck there. He got up, fought the urge to howl in triumph, and turned to face these seeming friends of his once it was sparking and sputtering, obviously out of commission. "Kill more of these things, and I'll feed you," Kota demanded in words he hoped would be clear. Without hesitation, they swarmed the next nearest robot after cawing with joy. It seems that the birds at Ua were as resilient as its students. Kota attempted to draw motivation from that and continued on until he startled himself by smelling one of his own kind. Had his uncle really sent someone? Although he was obviously unable to hunt down the great majority of humans, he could see that the more powerful the ridden, the more they violated the separation of the worlds, and that heroes were usually the worst of the lot. He didn't like heroes, and he still thought in the old ways that the ridden were a threat. His uncle was obviously incensed that someone would come so close to breaking the oath of the moon in that way, but his mother was much more understanding. Kota had then seen footage of Mighty Wolf, who was obviously one of their own, acting as one and realized the good he could do. She believed that as a hero, he could use Uratha's gifts to protect the world just as effectively as a civilian, if not more so. The responsibilities were the same, but they also had to adapt because things had changed since the Locust rendering. Fighting those who were truly evil was not a betrayal of their sacred mission, and ridden were now normal and not a threat to the balance, at least not unless they were. No, his uncle may have been upset, but he wasn't prepared to argue about it. Is this a member of the Pure? The thought of the terrible tales he had heard as a child about those monsters nearly made him curl up into a ball, but he knew it was probably a Forsaken from another pack. He had heard that the Pure would not want to be heroes, after all. The entire Forsaken faction was beset by the same uncertainty that had his mother and uncle at each other's throats, and it wasn't as though there was much interaction between the packs anymore. Is he supposed to meet the other werewolf? Aoyama used Silver Wolf's gifts to prevent him from grimacing in agony as the captured essence of the light spirit within his fetish destroyed multiple robots. In order to get rid of the images of his parents' horrified and defeated faces after they were caught trying to flee the breeding farms, he tried to convince himself that he could summon a laser as his quirk and that such things were necessary to dazzle the foolish herd surrounding him, taking advantage of their poor spirits without realizing what they truly owed the other world. They had to be kept in line because they were wolf-blooded and had no Forsaken ancestry. As he struck a brilliant pose to allow the lesser creatures of the physical world to admire his glory, he told himself that was true, that was what he had been told, and that was what the Ivory Claws wanted him to think. It made no difference if repeatedly telling himself that caused more suffering than his fetish, the agony of having molten silver smeared on him for his initiation, or the penance that had been required for failing to stop his parents from attempting to leave him alone. He believed in Silver Wolf and how he suffered for them. He also thought that by enrolling in this hero school, he would help the Pure gain a stronger foothold in the world of the ridden, gain a better understanding of why so many spirits were able to become trapped in human bodies without following spirit society's rules, and gain power so that he could assist in creating a new hunter's paradise. It was accurate. He didn't lie, even though he wasn't fire-touched. Instead of the grimace that followed, Just notice the smile he made as he flaunted his beauty to the world. Shinshida could use Garu without losing control much more easily than many werewolves 3 times his age, and he was proficient enough in Dalu form to keep it going without causing more madness than was necessary. It was sufficient that he could disguise the much larger, far more terrifying form as his true quirk and the hairier, muscular form as a mutation quirk. It was very impressive, and if it weren't for his demeanor, the Predator Kings would have been thrilled to welcome such a prodigy. He was far too eager to wear the formal garments of human design, and he had been raised to be far too courteous. In fact, the worthless child appeared to enjoy human civilization, and his time as pack bitch did nothing to dispel this opinion. As it was, he survived his initiation without incident, demonstrated extraordinary strength and a tactical mind whenever it mattered, and generally proved to be too much of a benefit to the tribe to not keep him among dire wolf's own. Had he been even slightly less skilled for his age, he would have been banished to the fire touched long ago. Naturally, there were benefits to having a predator king who could tolerate people, interacting with them, not eating them. The latter would have been at least somewhat acceptable. For example, it allowed them to recruit someone into the pro-heroes, whose eyes and nose could inform them of potential threats to the Confederacy and those who were prepared to fully embrace the rule of the spirits within. Shinshida was finally free of his pack and their unwavering disapproval because he didn't find it funny to curse out everyone who looked at him. He also believed that torturing random people the way a cat tortures a mouse wasn't really embracing the laws of nature as much as they thought it was. They were wolves, after all, not cats. Shinshida found himself smashing through the silly machines that humans used to pretend they could be true predators. To be honest, he was relieved to be free of them, but he would never confess to being so weak. He was well aware of what happened to those who were even suspected of fleeing, and some might assume that he was thinking about the Forsaken tribes. Izuku realized he was falling behind. Points were coming to him, but not many. It was just about as much as he could have received from being quirkless. He had to be the best of the best, and he simply wasn't doing that at the moment. Only 40 students would be accepted into the hero course, and who knows how many received recommendations to skip this little ordeal. He had to be able to do something, find a way to complete this more quickly. He thought about the nearby locus again, wondering if he could reach across the gauntlet and perhaps ask the spirits for assistance. However, how would he explain his disappearance to the UA leadership, who were undoubtedly observing? The closest robot was suddenly surrounded and torn apart by a swarm of irate birds, which would have been strange enough in and of itself if he hadn't also smelled something familiar. He had one of his own here, perhaps a fellow Uritha could lend him a hand. The two gazed at each other, Izuku unsure of what to do and the other seemingly too anxious. They saw a big boy with a rather odd face that almost looked like a mutation quirk perhaps inherited from a human ancestor. Eladoth, ghost wolf for now, Izuku finally said to start the conversation. The other spat out, Iraka hunter in darkness, as if in relief. That was really brave. If one of us were pure you would have just signed your death warrant. Izuku's face turned white when he realized he hadn't even thought about it. Sorry, I'm new to this, and I would really love to chat but I'm behind on the exam. Tell me your name, and maybe we can meet later, okay? A boy strutting around and demanding attention from everyone, not that he was getting any, since the other students were too preoccupied with their own exam performance, fired a laser into another robot, interrupting the other's response. Normally this would have been a minor annoyance, but he also had the scent. Izuku posed the serious question, how many werewolves try to be pro-heroes? Before today, I would have said practically none. I honestly thought just me and Mighty Wolf. A abrupt change in the olfactory character of his immediate surroundings diverted Aoyama's attention from his most recent performance. He had discovered Father Wolf's other children. Finding other bitch mother victims would divert his attention from his quest, but what if they were abandoned? He brushed the idea aside. Since humans somehow managed to capture so many spirits without even realizing it, the majority of Forsaken have distanced themselves from humanity and hid. They only emerged to deal with spirits that weren't Harry the Pure or imprisoned in human prisons. It was simply too absurd to even entertain the possibility that 2 more Forsaken would be in the same testing location as Mighty Wolf, who was a strange anomaly. Taking a sly look when he saw the locus, he whispered, "Bonjour, my fellows, it is nice to see some distant relatives." He walked confidently toward them, bowing and flapping a cape. "I think we have time, if you want to discuss things where none of the herd could hear." The big werewolf with the mutant appearance freaked out, asking, "Won't UA's cameras notice us?" The green-haired one whispered, I'm behind, I don't have time to talk. Aoyama grinned. Well, that won't do, not at all, letting the people fail. We should look out for one another, after all. I know that I don't have a problem with my current score, so maybe I could help you out in the spirit world and you can take credit for the examiners in the physical world, if there's something in the reflections to help us, that is. Or don't, it's no skin off my nose, and don't worry about the staff noticing, cameras tend to get weird about stepping sideways. Uncertain but acutely aware that he currently lacked a better plan, Izuku thought about this new Yuritha's offer. Adding, I'll help you out too, was the hunter in darkness, whose name he had yet to learn. He's right, the people should help the people, and I'm also pretty far ahead myself. After making that decision, the three turned their attention to their spirit halves, noticed the changing font of essence that loosened the boundaries between the spirit world and their own, and took that inexplicable turn that they were compelled to call sideways due to convention and the limitations of Japanese. It was amazing to see the testing center reflected in the spirit world. Magnificent structures built themselves only to collapse. Where the testers found themselves in the physical world, competition spirits, like masses of various miniature athletes from various sports battering one another in a pile that scarcely resembled a large human, danced around, gleefully consuming the energy that the technology spirits, who looked like robots with bolts of lightning for wiring, gave out as they screamed in pain from the destruction being wrought. Izuku gave himself a moment to be in awe and another to consider how he might be able to more easily destroy the robots in the real world by using these technology spirits. However, his thoughts were cut short when he turned to face the two other Yuritha and the glowing brands that were now in view. The hunter in darknesses were silver, just like his own and mighty wolves, but the flamboyant boy was spotted with red. The other two took action before Izuku had a chance to reflect on his lessons about werewolf culture and what that might mean. Before Izuku could blink, a huge, black wolf was trying its hardest to encircle the throat of a silvery white Dalu form with its maw. Izuku yelled, Guys, can't we talk this out? The hunter in darkness snarled at the flamboyant false Frenchman's throat, and the latter clung to the former, keeping him just out of reach of anything dangerous but unable to push him away. Neither of the wolf beasts in front of him was paying attention. Izuku heard the hunter in darkness growl something in the first tongue, but he persisted in his attempt. Aoyama's entire body erupted in pain as he attempted to summon his fetish, but the spirit was stronger and more persistent because he was in the shadows world. He summoned his agony gifts again and concentrated them to bear it until he had a better idea. Because of his purity, the spirits had recently bestowed upon him a slightly more potent gift. He gathered his essence to share his suffering with the Forsaken who were attempting to rip his throat out, and he visualized his own pain turning into a barbed arrow as the visions showed him. It was successful. The bitch mother's feeble and unclean slave threw itself involuntarily in front of him, wailing in agony. Before the other one decided to stop wasting time talking and save his friend, he raised his claws and was ready to strike the poor bastard's throat because he wanted to smirk but was too preoccupied to ignore the pain that his gifts were attempting to prevent from incapacitating him. Now why are deuce Forsaken dogs trying become fabulous heroes? Sacre bleu, shouldn't you be trying to kill the ridden of this world, not save them? Izuku answered, don't you pure hate humanity? Don't you want to save the spirits from them? Of course, Mon Ami, but figuring out why and how humanity has enslaved so many requires Angisha in the right places at the right times. The light spirit in his fetish eventually agreed to cooperate once more as they argued, enabling him to shoot a laser at the two. It was annoying when it missed, and even more annoying when it caused him so much pain that he had to inject even more essence into his agony gifts to prevent it from rendering him helpless. He went from frustrated to angry to scared when it struck into a technology spirit and prompted all the others of its kind to turn toward them hungrily. Naturally, he kept that expression off his face. He believed he could improve that renown and that there was no honor in displaying fear in front of the enemy. At least if he lived. His distraction was sufficient for the blacker shoot to jump back and successfully seize his throat this time. Maybe we should return to the skin world, he said. The teeth stayed firmly set, digging deeper and deeper into the soft flesh of the brute's neck as Aoyama tore at him with his claws. Izuku would have loved to examine the strange movements of the first technology spirit that attacked him while the others were preoccupied with tearing each other to pieces if it hadn't been attempting to kill him at the time. On the one hand, it had the jerky, mechanical behavior of a robot. On the other hand, it moved swiftly and smoothly, making it easy to jump around. When Izuku gave it some thought, he saw that it embodied the ideal of a robot, or the movement that a person with a limited knowledge of mechanics might assume a robot soldier would exhibit. Unfortunately, he lacked the mechanics knowledge to utilize that, so instead he switched to Dalu and attempted to dodge out of the way, completely failing when the shift took longer than anticipated and he was unable to move quickly enough. Perhaps Mighty Wolf was right to teach himself not to dodge. To his dismay, his healing factor was shut down as a mysterious simulation of electricity sped through his body, making him vibrate violently like a cartoon character in a lightning storm. Mighty Wolf had been accurate in pointing out the dangers of his training methods. He looked around, searching for anything that could save him here, and forgot about that for a moment. He only saw the two other Uritha, still too enmeshed in their bloodshed to intervene in the group's plight, and a few rival spirits who had come to witness their battle. Perhaps he could do something there. Izuku exclaimed, "Who is the greatest here?" and then gave the best translation he could recall in the first tongue. Izuku believed that the nearest competition spirit was getting energized when its miniature athletes began running in unison. The technology spirit called out, "Ni gravel," in a voice that sounded like it was coming from an antiquated computer. As the spirit knocked Izuku to the ground, he turned to face his fellow Uritha, not really understanding what that meant. He yelled, "Imru ni fur Imru," as he saw that his fellow Forsaken was tearing into the Pure's throat and had broken skin. Izuku reminded Kota of the oath they had taken together, and Kota was shocked to see what he had done. Prior to this, he had only ever killed rabbits, and he felt bad about it. Even with the vile enemy of his people beneath him and in the grip of his hunter's instincts, he was unsure of how he would deal with himself if he had blood on his hands. Or as he began to taste the coppery aroma in his mouth. He had nearly broken the part of the oath about not eating people that, at the time, he found too repulsive to even entertain the possibility of breaking in the future. The instincts were strong. He was startled out of his daze by Izuku's shout, "What does ni gravel mean?" He replied, "Not important," but as soon as he realized how that could sound, his nervousness took over. "I don't mean your question, I mean, gravel means important, and ni is a general negative." The thought of having to explain something significant to someone made him start to shake. Izuku didn't appear at all insulted. He just gave a nod. "Got it." He then attempted to yell in the first tongue at the spirit attempting to murder him, stating that it was crucial. The competition to destroy the robots in the skin world was more significant if there were more competition spirits. The competition to destroy the robots would have to end if the technology spirits were higher. Kota was a little impressed. This kid from Izuku had read the spirits' minds and exploited them. Most Uritha, including Kota himself, struggled with it, despite knowing that Eladoth were supposed to be better at it. Izuku's question, "Who deserves to rule this territory?" was the only one he spoke in his first tongue free of grammatical errors and the one that truly made his opponents take notice. The spirits turned against each other, ignoring the Uritha. While a competition spirit roared in a manner that sounded exactly like a cheering crowd but appeared to fortify its brethren, a technology spirit sent bits of metal and electricity flying as weapons. It seemed that Izuku had succeeded in inciting a full-scale choir war in the area. Nobody in the crowd had entered this battle with any lack of resolve. All of them intended to give it their all. That feeling suddenly exploded without any explanation. There was nothing else they could think of to prove themselves where they had previously wanted to. Those who had brought support items were an exception. They were both enamored of and fixated on the workings of their devices and the robots they were battling, but not enough to prevent them from being destroyed. Not that there was much to smash, because whatever strong emotion struck everyone caused the robots to go from being destroyed left and right to being destroyed sideways, up, down, and left and right. Teachers at UA were somewhat perplexed by the phenomenon. "Wow, they're really getting into it," Snipe observed. "Seeing the passion of youth makes me feel so happy." Midnight embraced herself. Nedzu just grinned. One could argue that 3 of the werewolves, or whoever agitated the spirits the most, should share some of the credit for all the points being scored now if anyone other than him knew what was actually going on. He had the power to demand that they be admitted regardless of their score, regardless of the financial cost and the inevitable lack of justification. Instead of wasting time thinking about that now, he simply noted that it was time to bring out the 0-pointer. Neither Izuku nor Kota cared much about the outcome of the conflict they had initiated, nor were they sure which side was winning. It was time to depart the shadow and return to the skin world. Obviously, Izuku's attempt to use this location to assist him with his exam was unsuccessful. If only they could agree on what to do with the pure who heals quickly, they would do that. We can't leave him. I don't care how bad the pure are, I'm not abandoning someone to these things. In an attempt to splutter out, spirits like the pure, they might not kill him, and he'll be strong enough to fight them off, and escape by himself. Kota encircled himself with his arms in a protective gesture. The hunter in darkness was constantly flinching and stifling his own words, and Izuku wasn't sure how to handle it. He questioned whether that was the case for all of them. He argued, then he'll be a threat to us, more than if we helped him, attempting to use practical reasoning in the event that moral reasoning proved ineffective. The other boy shouted, "Pure don't show gratitude to Forsaken," before yelling at his own outburst and covering his face with his hands. Did this person really try to cut someone else's throat as soon as he learned about their political beliefs? Instead of answering, Izuku grabbed Aoyama's body, which made his fellow Yuritha follow suit. This continued until they were both startled when the boy in question opened his eyes and asked what was going on in a loud, whiny voice. The three decided to settle the issue somewhere else and pushed themselves to move sideways as a computer with mechanical legs was flung over their heads until it landed and fired a lightning bolt that caused something right behind them to melt into a mass of melted trophies. Unfortunately, the chaos around them was so distracting that they could hardly focus after 30 seconds, which let something hit Kota. As they came back to reality, Kota squealed in agony and clutched an unseen wound on his side. Izuku demanded, "Are you okay? I never got your name." He didn't feel the need to be sheepish because the situation was serious enough. "Koji Kota," back said the hunter in darkness. Well, the pure spat in disgust as his own wounds were barely healed, "Thanks to Deuce that the herd's eyes mean I can't deal with you here. I'm glad that resulted in nothing. Helping a slave of the bitch mother would have been a mistake for which I'd never see enough penance." Kota said, "I'm not sure you'd be the one doing out the dealing," while Izuku attempted to determine what was hurting him so much. A huge machine that was larger than any of the robots they had seen during the exam loomed over them, and any answer that Aoyama might have had died on his lips. He yelled, "Sack Ray Blue," and then fled in the other direction. Just as Kota and Izuku were about to follow him, they heard a girl yelling for assistance. Izuku went into a panic. He could not avoid trying to assist, but he was also clueless about how to do so. The only abilities he possessed that might be helpful were those he should not use in front of the herd. Perhaps Kota knew more, but he was in a panic right now. He looked around, searching for something, anything. "Think, Izuku, think. I can see weak spots," Kota uttered with difficulty. Izuku yelled, "Where?" but the other person was only made more defensive by his raised voice. This was awful. The only thing that seemed to help this guy get over his nervousness was fighting the pure. "Point them out to my dazzling self," a voice that they both believed had just fled said. "So that I never delude myself into thinking I owe either of you a favor later," he explained. Kota was too enmeshed in his animosity toward the pure to assist Aoyama, and too overtaken by the circumstances overall to assist Izuku. That was made abundantly evident in the seconds that went by while he did not respond, until one of the competitive spirits subsided upon seeing the locus. That worried Izuku a little, but not too much until it came to him. He was inundated with information about how to motivate others rather than how to compete. To the Yuritha, inspiration was not a human concept, rather, it was a concept that the spirits understood and knew how to control and manipulate. However, the knowledge slipped from his grasp as it was too much, until the final sliver taught him how to find the right words. Izuku talked to Kota while wearing the inspiration gift he had apparently just learned. "Saving her is the work of a hero. Isn't that worth more than a simple grudge?" Gulping, Kota told Aoyama where to shoot. The machine did indeed slow down. The two's attacks caused it to halt before crushing the girl in front of it, but they did not destroy it. She appeared to be very appreciative of the three. One of the teachers inquired, "How should we divide the rescue points between them?" "Well, the one with the laser stomach seemed to do all of the work. I mean, sure, give the ones who talked to him about it whatever credit they deserve, but this, Aoyama, kid certainly deserves most of it." Nedzu grinned. "Are the werewolf factions at peace?" He noticed a glimmer of something, a blueprint for a better world developing inside of him. "I am about to give orders that I don't want questioned. I will not explain them." Every employee tensed as they turned to face their principal. Izuku Midoriya, Kota Koji, Yuga Aoyama, Jirota Shinshida. "I want them all passed, and in the same class. That is, once all four have had a personal interview with me." They gave the principal a suspicious look. "I mean, 3 of them were probably going to pass anyways, but the Midoriya kid. In response, Nezu said, I already told you that I won't explain it, grade the rest of the hopefuls as normal. Izuku quickly removed the rocks from the girl's legs, checking on her and finding out her name was Uraraka. He was happy to accept her gratitude until he realized how few points he had left and began to run in search of more, only to discover that all of the robots had somehow destroyed themselves. They were informed that their time was up by an alarm before he could become depressed over this. Izuku broke down in tears. When someone finally put a hand on his shoulder and told him that the principal had asked to see him, his tears stopped. It surprised Jiroto Shinshida to smell so many of his kind here. As he sat there, sniffing at the other 3 that were also brought before this school's principal, he became aware of their scents and pondered whether the person they were going to talk to was aware of them. Shinshida sniffed again and was startled to discover that the man with the peculiarity that made him resemble a giant rat was actually, you're a shard of the Plague King. He and the person wearing the absurd cape next to him both bowed in deference. The last one was just perplexed, and the one whose Hishu form contained the remnant of a mutation quirk gazed upon the rat spirit with horror. Yes, and it's strange to see ones who respect Father Wolf so much show me respect, considering how many times he tried to kill me, the principal replied with a grin. According to Izuku Midoriya, you're a spirit, but you're wandering around in the skin world without a host. I have a host, replied Nezu. It's this wonderful rat bear mouse body I've found and mutated to my heart's content after eating enough knowledge spirits to change my outlook on life. Something was causing Kota to panic. If you're a Beshalu, then does that mean you're going to? Nezu gave the frightened boy a smile. In the least, it was not consoling. While the rest of my body still absolutely wants to gnaw apart the gauntlet, at least which pieces of me can still think, as I already said this particular shard has been rethinking things. But your duty as a spirit, gasped Aoyama. Or Farah, as you call him, thought I was a menace to be destroyed. I don't see why you should start working with me now, but that old fight is thousands of years late. I want to talk about the fight between the 4 of you happening today. When Aoyama turned to face Shinshida, he said, these 2 are forsaken. Shinshida appeared perplexed. I would put those claws down before you fail whatever mission the Confederacy had you joined this school to perform, Nezu said courteously as he sipped his tea. The other boy pulled back the hand that was about to cut into the back of Izuku's neck before Izuku even saw it. Instead of answering Nezu directly, Shinshida spat out in disgust, is that why you didn't kill them before, Ivory Claw? Aoyama attempted to defend himself by saying, I owed them a favor when they saved me from an aggressive spirit, and I haven't had a chance away from the herd's sight since then, but the Predator King was not amenable. If a spirit managed to kill you, you were too weak to be among us. Those with pure blood who understand the agony Silver Wolf goes through first should preserve their lives. Only the strong live their own lives. The weak live at the strong's whims. Even though Nezu did not believe his present objective would have been simple in any case, he was momentarily persuaded to change his mind after remembering how bitterly the tribes fought among themselves, even within their own factions. Izuku cut in, aren't you guys coming to this school to be heroes? What kinds of attitudes are those for someone who wants to save people? Shinshida simply adjusted his glasses before answering, although Aoyama did appear a little uneasy at the question. I will, of course, live according to the standards of the human profession I adhere to. Additionally, I will, just as heroes claim to, strive to make the world a better place for all. His face became gloomy. However, saving everyone doesn't make the world a better place. You are attending an elite school, so you must have done well in science class, correct? You understood the principles of natural selection, right? It is nature's way to cull the unfit. By ensuring the best survive to pass on their genes, the species as a whole gets stronger, faster, or otherwise better. A species that doesn't evolve, that rejects nature's ways, grows weak and miserable. It doesn't improve life for anyone to do things that way. For an example, look at the only species that has managed to consistently reproduce without improving themselves or needing to let the weak die. He pointed to the window that faced the outside, where a number of people were gathered to talk about something, most likely the most recent test. Humans are the most disgusting and miserable creatures that there are, precisely because of generations of living this way. Izuku nearly ignored what his half-moon gift was telling him because he was so appalled by what this man was saying. He's saying it again. He is not lying. Rather, he is unsure of himself. But Nezu cut him off before he could attempt to counter that. You say that you want to live in accordance with this profession, right? I'd be very interested to hear you sell that line to the public. The apparent rat spirit laughed as he went on. As you can see, you four disagree on a lot. I know very well that you probably disagree to the point that words are utterly meaningless and only blood can resolve things. I brought you four here today to let you know that the only blood being spilled on my campus will be accompanied by sweat and tears from your hard work. You four are going to work together, and you will resolve your philosophical differences peacefully, both on and off campus while attending as students. Hint at disagreeing with this, especially through your actions, and not only can I expel you on a whim, I also know of an easily accessible yet rather hefty supply of silver weaponry and some men who know how to use it. The latter's tone was precisely the same upbeat one he had been using throughout, but none of them questioned the final statement's accuracy. Shinshita wanted to tear the spirit to pieces then and there, but he knew that he would be better off if he cooperated, in addition to the fact that he had no idea how powerful it was. Now was not the moment to attack the prey. He had to hold off on jumping until the right time. This was an unclean abomination, Aoyama told himself, but he wasn't really feeling it. He didn't feel nearly as filthy as he might have, and the two Forsaken had saved him. Oh well, even though he was always taught to maintain his integrity, he was also taught to endure suffering in order to gain more power, so this was a reward for his initial goal. Koda recalled all the terrible tales he had heard about the pure as a child. He was internally burned by fire touched until he became as insane as they were. As they gradually tore him apart, Ivory Claws pointed out all of his flaws. Of Predator Kings torturing him until they made him their prey by dropping the bodies of his loved ones in front of him week after week. He was not persuaded that the stories were false by anything he had seen of these two. He hadn't believed that his nervousness could worsen, but perhaps his uncle was correct. How could he claim to be a hero while taking a class with such individuals? He then turned to face Izuku, saw no hesitation in the boy's eyes, and concluded that if he hadn't been deterred by his fear of his family's criticism, then this minor problem wouldn't be any different. People were going to be saved by him. He would become a hero. Izuku's knowledge of the pure was limited to what Mighty Wolf had told him, and it wasn't a good one. It had not been any better because of this Shinshita child. But a hero was meant to save everyone, and during the exams, Aoyama had displayed that aspect of himself. They were obviously people, regardless of their other identities, and it was his responsibility to try to save them, even if it meant saving them from themselves. As Eladoth, he was expected to consider all sides and make appropriate judgments. He was more than willing to work on the half-moon gifts, which indicated that these two were not as committed to their principles as they seemed. With differing degrees of hesitation, all four committed to not tearing each other apart during their time at UA, whether on or off campus. Even though Tenko might not express it, his master liked him. Tenko was aware of this since he allowed the boy to remain a ghost wolf for a lot longer than he had promised and much longer than he should have. Even though he knew that Tenko had a Forsaken ancestor and would not be permitted in the Ivory Claws, the said master had a tendency to be cruel and vindictive. If he hadn't been paying attention to the little details, he would have likely discovered this after a brutal initiation. Most likely, that was the lesson that was intended. In any case, he was not particularly fond of the Predator Kings or the Fire Touched. The latter would require him to abandon human civilization, which meant he would have to give up his favorite pastimes. Don't play any more games. He liked their other ideas, which said that strong people could do anything they wanted as long as their strength permitted it, but he had no interest in living in the woods or as a street rat. Listening to endless sermons about Rabid Wolf's glory didn't help either. His master usually gave him propaganda created by the Fire Touched themselves, so it should have been presenting them in the best possible light, but everything he read about them came off as spooky and insane. In fact, they were pleased with their appearance. He sighed and turned to Kurogiri, his closest friend, not that he cared about something as trivial as friendship. One of the few successful attempts to free the spirit imprisoned within a human from whatever had given them their peculiarities produced the man. Once a human, this man was now a true Ridden, totally controlled by the spirits. Which of Father Wolf's loyal offspring would you pledge yourself to, if you were one of us? Asked Tenko. The Fire Touched recognize spirits like me as gods, therefore they're clearly the smartest. But the Predator Kings live properly, like spirits do, so they're the wisest. Tenko was glad that he had not bothered to mention the Ivory Claws, who presumably knew as well as he did how they would accept him. It wasn't that his counsel was any more helpful. Being a werewolf was really annoying, but considering that wasn't helping him pick a tribe. He was scratching himself, still not accustomed to the idea that he should have fur, then getting rid of it and then bringing it back. He required more insightful counsel. Are you sure that you can't take me to see the other pure? Kurogiri gave his cloud-headed thing a shake. It's part of my pact with Master. One of the orders I accepted was to keep the rest of the pure from swaying you. Tenko scratched himself even harder before he had another thought. Can you take me to see the Forsaken? Kurogiri's gaze grew strained. Why? Because I want to see the wrong way for Yuritha to live, so that I can better understand the right way. Despite his initial lack of conviction, Kurogiri finally stated, Master said nothing about preventing this, so I must obey. Kurogiri's body was a swirling mass of darkness that, if one looked closely, resembled the namesake of the pathway spirit, shifting and solidifying into intersecting straight lines. Tenko was given a brief stretch of this mass that would have led him anywhere the spirit desired. The very notion of location was influenced by Kurogiri, which caused Tenko to reflect philosophically. Did the location work the way it did and spirits were able to alter it, or did spirits create the idea of location and have the power to alter it because it was only an illusion they created in the first place? What did that say about the nature of reality, if the latter? Was the human race merely a creation of a spirit? That would have made them a part of the spirit world, wouldn't it? He was immediately jolted out of that illusion and returned to the mission after being placed, if the signs were to be believed, somewhere in the center of oven. Izuku's nerves made him freeze as he looked at the entrance. He needed a lot of inspiration right now, so it was kind of ironic that he had created it out of all the gift lists. Izuku, you're going to be a hero, you can succeed. He swallowed and tried again when that didn't quite calm him down. Izuku, you are a child of Father Wolf, so you can succeed. That reassured him more, somehow. He stepped forward and opened the door to find two boys shouting at each other. Oh, so you're some stuck-up rich kid who thinks he can tell me what to do. I am telling you that you need to behave yourself. How could someone with this level of decorum deal with villains? To his dismay, Izuku observed that Bakugo, one of the boys, had a darker expression. I've seen villains before, spoiled brat. They don't care about decorum when they're ripping your friend's stomach open. Izuku felt a knot in his stomach from guilt. Even though Kachan was still unaware that Midoriya was to blame, which is another reason the herd must be unaware of it, the fact that he was accountable for something similar that night. No, he wasn't in complete control of himself at the time and couldn't get down about it. The tall boy who had been harassing Bakugo appeared just as surprised, though probably for different reasons. I see that you have had some unpleasant experiences, but regardless, it is your duty as a future hero to represent the best of what humanity has to offer, and so. Can it or I'll kill you. Really, now you're talking like a villain. We have to show mercy to our enemies. I'll toss them into prison if they don't put up too much of a fight. That's the only mercy they'll get from me. Izuku momentarily questioned whether he was to blame for the trauma he had caused to his childhood friend, but he had to remind himself that Bakugo had always been this way. The boy was also being influenced by the flare juggling inside of him. It was his responsibility as an Elidoth to distinguish right from wrong, and he understood that if he was to do so for other people, he needed to have greater faith in himself. To suppress his uncertainties and fears, he needed to be stronger. He was prepared to be a new man who wouldn't jump at the first surprise, even though that was obviously much easier said than done. Excuse me, a girl said from behind him, and he jumped in surprise. You're one of the boys who helped me in the exam, right? As he rubbed the back of his head and tried not to think about the girl speaking to him, Izuku forced himself to sputter out, yeah, saying, I mean, I didn't do a whole lot, but the three of us were there. She grinned. You talked them into doing it, I saw that even in my panic. I don't know, but I got the sense that they wouldn't have done anything without your words. A woman's intuition, I guess. So, anyway, thank you. She bowed in front of Izuku's flushed face. Bakugo saw him and had to yell about it before his nerves permitted him to respond. Deku, what the hell are you doing here? You don't have a quirk. The tall boy and Uraraka both gave Bakugo a perplexed look. The latter said, yes, he does, he heals quickly. Bakugo scowled at his long-term victim, fully aware that he did not recover any more quickly than the typical person. After all, he was the one who had initially caused him so many injuries. Though he suppressed it, a tiny part of him did wonder what that fact said about him. It didn't really matter what he did to the NPCs because he was one of the few real people. He demanded, what's this about? Gulping, Izuku extended his hand. You can see for yourself. Bakugo glared as he placed his own hand over Izuku's, causing a sizable spark to flare up and leaving a noticeable but temporary mark on the other boy's hand, which eventually started to heal itself in front of him. In 3 seconds, it was gone. His gaze expanded. The way it healed, it seemed as though he was worrying about nothing. There was absolutely no possibility that Deku and that wolf thing were related. Unless he was also concealing that. After ruling out the idea that Deku was some kind of evil wolf monstrosity, he considered what else this might mean. The most plausible explanation he could think of was that Izuku had this peculiarity all his life but kept it a secret because he didn't believe Bakugo should be aware of it. He had obviously been demeaning Katsuki all along. He also had the thought that he was a late bloomer, but that didn't make sense because it had nothing to do with his own life. The idea that the extras would have their own lives, problems, and struggles that would interact with his, unless they were directly related to him, was unacceptable to him as the story's protagonist. It was all about him. Thus, it is clear that this bastard had been giggling behind his back whenever Bakugo pointed out his quirkless status. He knew full well that Katsuki Bakugo was completely mistaken, but he didn't bother to tell him so, Kachan was left to look foolish. He shouted at Deku, "Worthless little Deku," and glared at him while trembling. "How dare you?" Izuku, who had no idea what could possibly offend Kachan, took a step back, but Bakugo was not having any of it and moved forward, only to have Uraraka and the tall boy cross his path. Bakugo hadn't noticed, but Kota also appeared directly behind him, his hands extended in a menacing manner. The tall boy attempted to correct him, saying, "I don't know your history, but this behavior is even more inappropriate than before," but Bakugo simply yelled, "Out of my way, extras, before I kill you all." The others gave him more aggressive glares as his hands sparked up. Izuku became aware that Bakugo's spirit was expressing his feelings to the others, intensifying the already tense situation. Before Class 1A became a battlefield, something had to be done, but what? Fortunately, he didn't need to think of a solution. Class 1A had disciplinary personnel because it was a school. Eventually, Aizawa decided it was time to step in, but their teacher was actually hiding away when it all began, watching his new charges without them realizing he was there, helping him create this mysterious mentor vibe. Calmly but projecting his voice, he declared, "The first one to throw a punch, kick, or use their quirk will be expelled." Each of the 4 paused their activity and bowed. "Yes, Sensei," they all said simultaneously. The rest of the class stared at their teacher in wonder, having paused their work to observe the spectacle that was developing at the front of the room. Someone said, "Where did you come from?" With admiration and jealousy, an invisible girl questioned, "Is it an invisibility quirk?" HMMPHED Jirota Shinshida. He was standing in the corner where the light didn't touch. Was I really the only one who noticed him? Aoyama chuckled toward Shinshida. "We don't all have your sense of smell, monsieur." The two exchanged glances as though they were telling each other a personal joke. Izuku and Kota exchanged glances as well, expressing their embarrassment at not smelling the man before the pure did, both without using words. While the students were resettling into their seats, Aizawa took a moment to pay particular attention to the 4 that Nedzu had forcibly brought into his classroom. Even though Aoyama was trying to hide it, Jirota had actually seen him before the rest of the class. Why were these 4 there? Well, until it hampered their potential, that wasn't his problem. So, this is typically the point where we go to orientation, have our little entrance ceremony, get you used to the facilities. I personally think that it's a waste of time, and since you're all so ready and willing to use your quirks already, I guess that you're strong enough to not need it. Instead, meet me outside, and get into your workout clothes. Trust me, you'll need them. Izuku turned to face his classmates, who were all resolved to take on the task their teacher had set for them, some of whom were anxious and others composed. He told them that they would be taking a series of tests, similar to the physical exams they had completed throughout middle school, but this time they were not only permitted but encouraged to use their quirks to raise the scores in any way they saw fit. This was demonstrated when he had Bakugo step forward and use his quirk to throw a baseball, the force of the explosion making an impressive increase in its potential. Some of them became excited about this, but he put a stop to it by saying that whoever finished last would be kicked out. With the exception of some of the most self-assured, everyone was now afraid, but Izuku was just perplexed. He knew from his half-moon gifts that Aizawa was telling the truth when he said that the person who placed last was the one who was being expelled. So, The criteria for expulsion were different. What was it? Before they were all taken up to the first event, where they were divided into pairs and had to race each other, he didn't have enough time to consider the protocol. In contrast to a typical race, Aizawa set his stopwatch to score them according to how fast they crossed. The only thing that mattered was how long it took to cross, not how quickly. The instructor was happy to see that everyone was taking his advice to embrace their individuality seriously. While some were truly inventive, such as one girl who used her immunity to her own acid to make her feet slippery and frictionless and another who made a bicycle and rode it across, the majority of them did the obvious, such as Jiroda leaping across on all fours and Iida using his jet boosters to, well, boost himself. Then Izuku Midoriya appeared. Even though he didn't perform poorly by the standards of a normal human, he was the one that Aizawa had his sights set on. He wouldn't be the only one to just run across, seemingly not seeing a use for his quirk here. The boy wasn't here because he earned it on the entrance exam, but rather because Nedzu wanted him here for some reason. The boy was the very kind of would-be hero that Aizawa detested the most, the martyrs, and that alone made the man want to throw him out. They were the ones who didn't care about themselves, who put everything on the line, and who believed that their principles would save them. They were the ones who forced him to bury an excessive number of inadequately sized coffins. He was certain that the boy's quirk was the cause. Super regeneration would cause anyone to develop an irrational sense of their own resilience, but he was not going to allow the child who believed that willingly getting hurt and letting his quirk handle the fallout was a wise tactic to receive even a pro-hero's license. Was it a rig? He guessed so, of course, but life wasn't fair. Still unaccustomed to the odors of oven, with its peculiar food and dirty streets, Tenko staggered around. Since he was supposedly in the middle of Forsaken territory, he suspected that this would be dangerous. He tried to get over his ebbing and flowing episodes of nausea until his stomach threatened to overturn and he made the decision to summon his weather gifts and disperse the foul smells into nothingness. That proved to be a mistake right away. I thought that I smelled one of our kind here, a growl came from right above him. Tenko was confident that this werewolf wouldn't harm him right away because the herd was all around them, but if he didn't do this correctly, it would only buy him a little more time. Rahu Ghost Wolf, Tenko said, lying as he spoke. I'm relatively new to this. I must have missed the territorial markings. They would fight if they moved sideways. There would be a fight if this werewolf could detect whether he was telling the truth or smell the pure scent on him. Kahalith Bone Shadow, replied the other, and not too fond of babysitting an idiot Rahu who can't even introduce himself before stepping on another pack's turf. As Tenko exposed his neck to the Forsaken, he thought bitterly, the low respect the high. I am no threat, and I recognize your claim to this land. As a fellow Confederate, Tenko could ask for a favor if he were pure, but based on his memories of his lessons, the Forsaken were more or less independent, allowing their packs to quarrel with one another, not to demonstrate who was stronger as would be appropriate, but to assert their ownership of what was rightfully theirs, for their pack and not the people. As might be expected of the slaves of the bitch mother, it was stupid. Well, you at least try to have some manners, even if only after the fact. What is your business, pup? I don't think the path of the ghost wolf is working out, and I wanted to see how the other Uritha live. I want to see if I can find a tribe to join. Without verifying the ghost wolf's decision, the Bone Shadow walked toward the city center after inviting Tenko to follow him or leave the boundaries of their territory. Tenko followed the Bone Shadow even though 1,000 reasons didn't make sense to him. They swerved through a number of congested streets, past one street vendor after another, and through narrow alleys that were so difficult for him to imagine navigating alone that he probably didn't want to. Not allowing the newcomer to simply go back where he came from. He could be dangerous. Nevertheless, they eventually found a big but unremarkable building, and the Bone Shadow said something in the first tongue to open a door. As they entered, they smelled a dozen Forsaken. The situation was becoming increasingly unstable. Despite his dislike, he persisted. This must have had some value. Izuku felt appalled. This obstacle course was giving him absolutely no progress. This would be easy enough if he could change forms, as Shinshida was repeatedly displaying, but he couldn't do that with the herd encircling him, and he didn't see how Inspiration or Half Moon could assist him. And neither would his official quirk, or even his sense of smell. He suddenly found himself wondering how people who truly had quirks that only did those things would do this. Would they not succeed? The thought of what Aizawa-sensei had said and how that last part was a lie struck him as a realization if they gave up. After all, The purpose of the entire test was to discover the potential of their eccentricities. If they couldn't use theirs, they were obviously expelled. His only concern was whether he could use his quirk to get around one of the obstacles, there, rather than his final score. The answer became clear to him as he faced a pulley-based strength test. He would just keep pulling hard enough to wrench his arm out, doing far better at its peak than he could without a quirk and demonstrating its value, while others would use their inherent strength or some quirk-based enhancement. It should elevate him above most who were forced to rely solely on their physical strength, but it wouldn't put him on the same level as the boy who pulled on it with 4 arms, the boy who called forth a crow spirit to pull it for him, or really a lot of others. Aizawa readied himself after noticing a determined expression on the boy he was watching. He had no intention of allowing the child to injure himself in order to prove something. Izuku felt weird as he grasped the pulley, pulling on it with all his strength and then pushing it farther than any human should be able to let go. It took him a moment to realize, but it felt as though someone was playing with his essence. He felt suffocated by the air around him, but it wasn't because of the quality of the air. Rather, it was because of something more spiritual. The gauntlet was being strengthened, further dividing the spirit world from the human world than usual. He couldn't step sideways anyway because he wasn't close to a locus, but if he could have done so normally, it would not have been possible now. Furthermore, he felt unreasonably confident that his inspiration gift was also useless, and the effects of his half-moon gifts disappeared. As terrified as he was of whatever it was that was causing this, Izuku made himself thank the stars that his regeneration was not reliant on essence and pulled as hard as he could, stifling the pain as his muscles pulled his arms and continuing as they healed themselves, pulling farther than his strength permitted, until his arm popped out of its socket, dropping the rope by accident and causing him to curse as his body forced it back into place. The faint outline of a spider in Aizawa-sensei caught his attention as he looked around to see what could be tampering with the spirit world in this way. He ignored that and saw that this was Eraserhead by the way the man's hair looked. He had the ability to eliminate quirks, presumably by squelching his target's essence and severing their link to the spirit world. Izuku questioned if he had a suspicion. If he did, would it alter his use of his quirk? He thought about the fact that Aizawa had apparently erased his quirk, but it still activated, before he could come up with a number of things to write down later. To anyone else, at least, it would appear that way. His instructor appeared stunned. He began to say, "How?" but stopped himself. "So it's a mutation quirk, tied directly into your body. Good to know. What isn't is how you're doing this. Destroying yourself doesn't help anybody. But it's how my quirk works. How can I use it if I'm not allowed to, well, use it?" Aizawa let out a sigh. As much as people mistake the two, martyrdom and heroism aren't the same thing. I can't let someone who's so willing to get himself killed, quirk or not, pass, I'm sorry. Izuku kept the real growl inside of him, but something inside of him growled at the teacher's words. He simply yelled, "Would you have passed this test with your quirk?" From the outside. He was certain that he would be groveling and apologizing for this outburst later, but for the moment, the stress of the test, the competitive spirit it fostered, and his Elidoth instincts telling him that this was wrong would prevent his normal anxiety from doing its job. What advantage would it give you? The only way you could have passed this test was by sabotaging the others to lower their scores. Is that any more heroic, breaking down other heroes to make yourself look better? Martyrdom is a lot closer to heroism than that. Aizawa gave him a fierce look. I never got through my schooling by sabotaging others. Izuku went on. Yes, for a normal person what I'm doing would be stupid and self-destructive, but you yourself gave us that whole lecture about not everyone being equal. I'm not equal to others. My quirk lets me survive things that would incapacitate most people, and what kind of hero would I be if I didn't use it to its fullest potential? Don't you want to see our potential? He might or might not have used his inspiration gifts to enhance Aizawa-sensei's confidence in his abilities after the effect on the gauntlet disappeared. He didn't want to cow the man, he wanted to prove himself. Tenko was a little taken aback to see a spirit in charge of the Forsaken, considering all he had been taught about the distinctions between the pure and Forsaken worldviews. It was strange to see the mirror spirit in all its splendor, serving as both a totem and a leader to this pack. Of course, he had been taught about the pack totems and the weak and treacherous spirits that revered the Forsaken for some reason that he could not understand. He was even more shocked to see the werewolves around him nodding along as it launched into a tirade about how the locus rendering had thrown the world out of balance and that the ridden needed to be taken care of now more than ever. Getting rid of the ridden now, what were they hoping to achieve? Most of them were ridden, weren't they? Then, after giving it some more thought, he pondered whether they might be right. If given the chance, why shouldn't the Eartha eliminate the herd? According to his sensei's history lessons, it would aid in the restoration of Hunter's Paradise, and it sounded as though the Forsaken were now aboard, something that was unimaginable in earlier times. One of the Forsaken reassured his fellow pack members, but only until balance is restored. The others, some of whom expressed repressed hesitancy, concurred. Tenko gritted his teeth. When, by their own standards, would equilibrium be restored? They seemed to be deceiving themselves about their own convictions. Or, more accurately, they were lying about what their worldview required them to do. They had convictions, but they didn't feel comfortable following through on them. Ivory Claws and Predator Kings would have scoffed at typical Forsaken weakness, but the fire touched would have snapped. It was anathema to their entire existence to live in deception and make claims about ideals that you don't actually hold, to the extent of being banned by Rabid Wolf. It began to annoy him as well as he listened to their speeches, each one of them yelling about the necessity of eradicating humanity and then promptly denying that they had just done so. Similar to those heroes who created a society centered on saving lives and abandoned him when no one wanted to assist. Similar to his father's insistence that he loved his family but his actions betrayed that love. Similar to how his family has accused his father of wrongdoing without ever attempting to stop or alter him. Like these individuals, they were all lies. To be honest, he didn't hate their intentions. Perhaps the destruction of human society was necessary, but he couldn't respect them when they refused to acknowledge it. Admit the hate if it drove your actions. Destroy if that's what you wanted. Just don't act that way. He was itching from this line of thought. The itching and scratching became more noticeable to others as he became more and more repulsed by these fakes and their unself-aware hatred. And you, Ghost Wolf, the Forsaken said with a strange mixture of contempt and sympathy. What do you think must be done about the balance between human and spirit? With a smile on his face, Tenko gazed at them. I think that if you want to kill a bunch of people, you should just come out and say it. They all snarled in exasperation and protested. We aren't talking about killing people, just getting rid of the ridden. Tell me, how are you getting rid of them if you don't plan to kill them? And how many ridden are there nowadays? Do you even know a human who isn't? Balance, someone said, it's all about balance. We're just trying to find out how to restore balance. You know how to restore balance, or at least get rid of most of the spirits walking in the skin world these days. You're just too squeamish to say it out loud. In retrospect, he should have refrained from starting a fight because he was outnumbered and lacked experience. And yet there he was, urinating on a room full of creatures that were known to be easily irritated. He was almost gifted at the level of stupidity he displayed. Kurogiri intended to step in and help the young apprentice leave before the Forsaken tore him to pieces, but their respective masters shook their heads. I don't intend to let the boy die, don't get me wrong, but I can't help but shake the sense that something wonderful is about to happen. Tenko considered Hero Society and how completely devoid of fakes it was. Upon observing these men, he noticed the same deceit. It's all fake. Everything about this society, built on false heroes, and even Eartha Society, built on the dead ideals of long-gone spirits, obsessing over some balance that couldn't even begin to matter anymore so you can tell yourselves you're not just clamoring to destroy your enemies. It makes me sick. Something touched the back of his head. Tenko was not in a state to notice the spirit's reaction, but it felt it too, now in the face of a blue man covered in mirrors. All the others could do was growl and stare at the newcomer. Some had assumed the form of Dalu. I'm not even sure that you're wrong about killing them. I hate this world, this pathetic society. I want to see it destroyed, to be honest. But that's the thing, I'm honest about it. I don't need to hide behind lofty words about how my destruction is something other than the raw, blistering hate that it is. I will tell no lies, nor will I allow a lie to be told in my presence. He was so frustrated that he failed to realize he was quoting the final vow of the oath, the one in which he dedicated himself to Rabid Wolf and the fire touched. When the fever developed in the back of his head, obscuring his thoughts in a sickening fog, he was so furious that he failed to notice any change. All he knew was that he transformed into Garo, and the others leapt. It was supposed to be a trouncing. Not only did they outnumber him, but they also had more experience, were closer to their pack totem, and some were even stronger in Dalu form. He was angry and slashed. He called forth whatever winds he could. To his credit, he even dealt a good deal of damage, but the enemy was more accurate and had gifts that were well beyond his capabilities, one of which even cancelled out his winds. The feverishness in the back of his head got worse and worse as he fought through the pain and suffered for his truth. It demanded that he bite and spread his pain, which he did. His bite barely caused the Forsaken to retreat, and the wound was far from incapacitating, but then something happened. Angry and savage, the bite victim began to rant and rave, lash out at another member of his family who, after turning to reprimand his companion for a moment, began to feel the same way and tore into both his attacker and the closest werewolf. The situation quickly deteriorated, with every Eurytha suffering from an unexplained form of insanity, many of them unintentionally transforming into Kuruth and Garo forms. This turn of events did not make Tenko safe. He was still a target, but not the only one, and his performance in the battle prior to the sudden gift's manifestation left him in a terrible state that was only swiftly healed by Werewolf's abilities. The ghost approached Tenko, untouched by this outburst of craziness. As if their own attack affected them rather than the target, some of the Forsaken struck at it in their frenzied state, but each one was knocked back. This entire pack was brought low by one of the weaker of the pure, using one of the weaker of the Izadok's gifts. I smell the scent of an older one here. Did Rabid Wolf himself just bestow you with this knowledge? The beast appeared both frightened and impressed. It said, "You are one to look out for," and in some way Tenko sensed his renown change. Regretfully, he was too preoccupied to notice the next Forsaken to jump on him and begin tearing him to pieces because he was too preoccupied with this change. The nearly unintentional decision to choose tribe and the respect he had gained from the spirit world were about to go to waste, until Kurogiri's portal suddenly seized him. Kurogiri was in a broken, battered state, and neither he nor his master responded. They only inquired as to whether the trip had taught him as much as he had anticipated. Everyone in Class 1A gathered anxiously to await the examination's results. Izuku silently kicked himself after realizing with dismay that he had finished last, narrowly losing to one, Mineta. Even though he was aware that his teacher was fabricating the reason for his expulsion, this could be his evasive way of telling the school board that his previous outburst might have earned him one. By the way, I was lying about the expulsion thing. That was just to get you to try your best. It was strange. Again, he was lying when he claimed that the expulsion was a lie, but he was honest about why he was lying. Izuku was so confused by this man that he nearly forgot how relieved he was that he wouldn't be sent out here. After spending the entire first school day on Aizawa's small test, there wasn't much to do but head home. Unbeknownst to him, Izuku was getting ready to leave alone as usual when he was startled to see Uraraka rushing to join him. The tall boy who had earlier confronted Bakugo joined them in silence, which shocked him even more than the fact that Kota was watching him from the shadows. Was he friends with anyone? That is your name, right? I never got it, and it's what Bakugo calls you, Izuku said, deflated as he realized that somehow he had found himself surrounded by even more bullies who wanted to beat him down for his worthless existence. Izuku's eyes nearly watered at the thought until Uraraka yelled, "Hey, Deku." He swallowed his pride and tried to think of the most polite way to correct her. His own thoughts were jumbled, and 1,000 unrelated ideas were forced to compete with one another until none could be brought forward. When the others turned to face him, Kota squeaked out, "His name is Izuku Midoriya," and then buried his head in his arms. "Yeah," Izuku said to regain their focus. "Deku is just a nickname Kachan made for me when we were kids. I don't really like it, to be honest." The tall boy said, "I see," and adjusted his glasses. "I will refrain from its use in the future, then, Midoriya. You may call me Tenya Iida." Uraraka remarked, "I kind of think that Deku sounds cute," which instantly caused Izuku to rearrange all of the unpleasant memories he had of that name with the effectiveness that only a teenage boy desperate to win a girl could muster. He stumbled, "Deku it is, then, out." Iida appeared perplexed. Kota stifled a laugh. His fellow Eurytha whispered in the first tongue, "I see you found a human to cleave to," making his face flush. Uraraka mentioned, "Are you okay? You look like you're getting a fever," which made Iida stop speculating about the language Kota had just used and instead bring up the need for prompt attention to health concerns. "I'm fine, I just don't talk to people that often." Kota hung in the back and nodded along as Uraraka and Iida carried the majority of their conversation, which was surprisingly pleasant compared to what he had previously experienced. Kota eventually forced himself to ask what he had been wanting to ask for some time after the former parted ways. When Izuku gave him a questioning look, the hunter in darkness began to tremble and strut his fingers together. "Do you want to form a pack?" Izuku wanted to interrupt the boy's bewildered mutterings with a definitive response, but the topic caught him off guard. "I mean, Not permanently, necessarily, it's just that I'm far from my family's territory, and as a werewolf and a hunter in darkness in particular it's kind of important that I claim my own. But, well, I'm scared to do it by myself, especially with the pure around, so, I thought, maybe, Izuku said. Finding a pack and claiming a territory for oneself was a crucial aspect of Uritha development, as Mighty Wolf had essentially confirmed. However, he hadn't really pressured Izuku to do so, and the topic sort of died in his own head. Did he belong to the pack of Mighty Wolf? When Izuku said, I want to, yes, Kota's perplexity finally ended. But I kind of want to clarify things with my mentor first. Things were resolved without the need for additional words thanks to the expressions of excitement, fear, and neutrality. To be honest, Aoyama had no reason to talk to his fellow pure because he didn't believe he was at odds with Shinshida. He could tell they had little in common except Confederate allegiance, which is why Shinshida's visit to talk to him was so unexpected. Did you smell our instructor when he used his written gifts? It was not until he said, it was more pungent than most spirits. It felt a little uncomfortable, like a spider, that he realized what he was doing. We are studying under an Aslu. Even though they were revered creatures and the Earth's legitimate rulers, some spirits were still adversaries. Only the strongest of the Maelgen, the Idagam, and the Aslu were left, aside from the Bitch Mother and almost every moon spirit beneath her. The Forsaken Pack totems were to be treated with the same contempt as the Forsaken themselves. The spider spirits were Father Wolf's longtime adversaries, much like the Beshalu, but instead of acting like typical spirits or tearing apart the gauntlet, as most Beshalu preferred, they worked to fortify the barrier between the spirit and skin worlds so that essence only flowed to themselves. This was in contrast to the Beshalu, whose original body split into hundreds of smaller ones. In actuality, the pure had no personal animosity toward the creatures, unlike their other adversaries, but the truth was that their objectives were completely at odds. What was to be done, then? Aoyama reminded his companion, killing our teacher wouldn't help with that. We're here to gather information and gain influence. The predator only gathers information to know when to strike his prey, Jiroda replied. And is it time to strike at our prey? He's a pro-hero, one of the best fighters among the humans, and he has the backing of the human society. Especially the ones we're here to investigate, and that Beshalu who knows about us and can share our weaknesses with the herd. I don't think having Ridden rip us apart with silver knives will further the Pure's cause. Clearly attempting to argue, but fully aware that the ivory claw was correct, Jiroda flashed his teeth. So we watch, wait, and report, until the moment is right to strike. Before they parted, Aoyama gave it some more thought. As always. Besides, wouldn't an Aslu be better as a slave to its host? He doesn't look like he's turned into a were spider, so shouldn't we keep it where it is? Jiroda simply snorted and turned to leave. Mighty Wolf was more than happy to recommend that Izuku comply with Kota's request, so the two set out to locate an empty space that they could claim as their own. Izuku asked, so, how big is it supposed to be? Kota pressed his fingers together in an attempt to calm himself. Technically, as big as you can get it without stepping on another's territory, but only if you can defend everything you claim. My uncle always said that you should never claim more than you can patrol in a single day. Though, my uncle tends to be a bit strict about things that don't really matter, so, That makes sense, honestly. No use claiming what we can't walk around, and you have to keep your territory sacred to please Black Wolf, right? Or is that the Iron Masters? Sorry, I only heard the oaths once. Izuku didn't need his half-moon gifts to see some awkwardness there, and he chose to be tactful for the time being rather than prying into his Packmady's affairs. Kota reassured him, you're right, no need to worry. Izuku resisted letting out a sigh. Their ongoing awkwardness with one another did not support positive and healthy growth. If they wanted their pack to be successful, someone had to be in charge. The question of how Izuku would overcome his nerves was not much answered by the following day at school. For the most part, it was just like any other school. They acquired mathematical knowledge. He had never had any trouble learning English before, but all of a sudden it became entangled with the first tongue in his mind. They gained knowledge of literature and history. They didn't begin learning what they had all come to UA for, heroics, until the afternoon. All right, said Aizawa, it's your first week here, so we won't be doing much that's too fancy, just trying to assess where you stand. 2-on-2 spars, the winner is the one who either knocks the opponents out of bounds or gets the capture tape on their wrists first. Teams will be decided randomly. Izuku had used the chalk dust Mighty Wolf had given him earlier to get ready for this. In order to learn more about the true limitations and purposes of his classmates' peculiarities, he wanted to know about all of their spirits. Car juggling, influence, movement, fire, ban, may only remain active for a length of time in proportion to the engines growing from its corpus or host. Noumena, gifts of evasion, adhesion gaffling, influence, surface adhesion, spherical objects, ban, may not physically touch objects it has influenced. Elemental incarnate, influence and ban unreadable, vassalage, fire juggling, influence, fire, ban, may not cool down, ice juggling, influence, wind, cold, water, ban, may not heat up. That made Izuku stop and think. He was forced to admit that the boy with the multicolored hair and the hard face had 3 spirits living inside of him, and that he had not yet turned into an old-fashioned ridden. Apparently, the third was served by 2 of them. Invention incarnate, influence, technology, metal, carbon, intellect, ban, cannot stay awake without regular sacrifices of human fat. Noumena, gifts of technology, gifts of insight. Izuku was forced to admit that the 2 students who were recommended had strong spirits inside of them. He assumed it made sense. Acid gaffling, influence, acidic liquids, ban, may not harm the color pink. Flesh juggling, influence, human body, shapes, ban, may not look like another creature. Noumena, gifts of shaping. Frog juggling, influence, amphibians, body parts, water, ban, must sleep when cold. Noumena, gifts of nature. Vassalage, bound to Father Toad. Monkey juggling, influence, movement, body parts, ban unreadable. Noumena, gifts of strength, gifts of evasion. Force juggling, influence, gravity, momentum, ban, must touch an object 5 times to influence. Tape gaffling, influence, surface adhesion, cellulose, ban, may not touch cotton. Music juggling, influence, sound, instruments, ears, ban, must interact with small holes when possible. Noumena, gifts of inspiration. Storm juggling, influence, electricity, wind, ban, must target itself to unleash its full power. Noumena, gifts of weather. Naturally, Kota, Aoyama, and Shinsaida had no spirits to read. Bakugo and Hagakure had the same readings he had received on them outside of the entrance exam, and the one with the bird's head was unreadable. The possibilities of everything he had just learned caused his mind to spin, possibly too much. When someone tapped him on the shoulder and told him that he, Uraraka, Bakugo, and Iida were awake, he was enthralled, taking in all the strange spirits enhancing his classmates. So, Uraraka said to Izuku, "You know Bakugo, right? You two were close before coming here." At one point, yeah, Izuku concluded, as the most secure response. Well, do you have any ideas about how to face him? What's he like? What are his weaknesses? Izuku attempted to consider the issue, but he became engrossed in the numerous recollections of Bakugo's varying degrees of pleasantness, the majority of which were on the low end of the spectrum. He's aggressive, the boy stammered out at last, and egotistical. The idea that he might be wrong about something drives him into a fury. However, he's not stupid. He does know how to strategize under that abrasive, screaming exterior. As he tried to think of a way to phrase this without giving away that spirits existed, he added, and in addition to his explosions, he also affects people's emotions. It's not strong, but when you're around him, you start feeling how he expects you to feel. In a white lie, he said, "I genuinely don't know if it's a second quirk or he's just that charismatic." Uraraka gave a nod. "So what do we do?" Izuku asked. Me. He suppressed his anxiety and considered the situation they were in after noticing from her expression that she was serious. "I think you should go after Iida. He'll suffer more if you hit him with your quirk than Bakugo would, he doesn't rely on his mobility as much. Plus, Bakugo's going to be trying to hurt his opponent more, and I can take it thanks to my quirk." Tenya had asked, "Now, what is our plan?" in the hopes that his partner would make some suggestions that he could accept, reject, or explain, which would start a fruitful conversation about how they could combat their adversaries together. None of that was given to him. "I'm going to show worthless little Deku that he doesn't belong here, while you do whatever the hell you want with round face over there." To show his disapproval, Tenya's arm began to chop up and down. "We are a team. We should be working together." And the best thing you can do to help me is not get in my way." Bakugo yelled. Both were somewhat taken aback as the explosion user glared at the Ingenium heir. His glares never failed to provoke a response from Bakugo. Iida had dealt with challenging individuals in the past, so this shouldn't have been a novel experience for him, but he couldn't help but feel a nagging fear in his mind. For whatever reason, something inside of him wanted to be afraid of this boy, but he wasn't going to allow that bullshit to rule his life. He went on to say, "I intend to continue with this course, and that means doing well in challenges like this. You don't have to like me, or even respect me, but you do have to work with me if you want to have a successful UA career." He suppressed any exterior reaction to this emotion. Bakugo snorted before attempting to use diplomacy after realizing that Glasses was not going to back down. Sort of. Iida was about to agree that that was a reasonable argument when Bakugo went on because, well, Bakugo. Deku is mine. Round face is yours. That's our strategy. Keep them from working together. We both know our own strengths better than each other's, so we'd likely get in each other's way as much as we'd help each other. Besides, I'm going to be the #1 hero, and don't need some worthless extra telling me how to advance my career. You certainly won't become #1 with those people's skills, no matter how much talent you may or may not have. Aizawa told them it was time to begin just as they were about to get into a heated argument, so they stuck with Bakugo's suggestion because they had wasted time that could have been spent coming up with a better plan. Izuku caught Bakugo's attention and experienced a range of unexpected emotions as they stood on opposite sides of an arena that was flat aside from the various pieces of debris strewn about to create a realistic battlefield. He anticipated being both scared and resolute. Yes, those existed, but he also felt hungry. Bakugo was an enemy whose retribution had been long overdue, not just a childhood friend who had now turned into a bully. He was the prey. Izuku's inner wolf was howling for the hunt, and he had to force himself not to let his voice do it. After all, it wouldn't do to reveal anything other than his quirk, but if it were something the herd wouldn't notice. "Uraraka, I saw you at the quirk assessment. You were amazing. Just do as well here as you did there, and we have got this." As he spoke, he put some essence into his gift of inspiration. No one could really argue that she didn't believe her sudden boost in ability was anything more than a routine confidence boost. Uraraka was ecstatic. She genuinely believed that Izuku's words had meaning, though she wasn't sure why. They had an impact on her and enhanced her potential. She jumped up to reach Iida, who appeared to be aiming for her anyhow based on his own actions, and was ready to kick him from above. However, she was startled out of her reverie when her opponent quickly grabbed her lower leg and spun her around, turning her own artificial lightness into a weakness that allowed him to ragdoll her with only human strength. The strong aroma of caramel overshadowed Izuku's desire to assist Uraraka. Or rather, the caramel-like smell of nitroglycerin. Bakugo had attempted to move through the debris for a sneak attack in an almost uncharacteristic move, but his lifelong bully Izuku's enhanced sense of smell rendered the move useless. Bakugo screamed, "Deku, what is this? Have you been holding back this whole time? Have you been looking down on me?" And leapt to the side just as an explosion was about to hit him. He wasted no time with follow-up charge. Instead of responding to Bakugo's next attack, Izuku sidestepped it. It was challenging because Kachan was having trouble controlling his inner wolf, not because of his speed, even though that was a significant contributing factor. Everything he heard and saw brought back memories of everything the spiky-haired boy had done to him over the years. He was upset after hearing his lurid conspiracy theories and his attempts to scare and threaten Izuku with the absurdities he had concocted. It was never a good sign when a werewolf was furious. Since his first change, Death Rage had not posed a significant threat, but now it was simmering beneath the surface. He actually sprouted a claw before he forced it down as an explosion sounded directly beneath him, sending him flying and barely giving him time to roll out of the way before Kachan got another hit in. He needed to win this in Hishu. Instead of Uraraka's deft move, Iida's honor saved her. She flinched in agony, and he feared that he had overreached himself with a fellow hero student, which allowed her to leap away. He easily caught up to her because of those engines, but this time she was ready for him and extended her fingers, nearly catching him before he ducked at the last second and slammed his body against hers, sending her rolling in the direction of the boundary. She was saved this time by sheer luck. She could not continue to depend on that. If I have to fight myself, how can I fight him alone? As he barely avoided another blow, Izuku raged in his mind. He recognized the obvious as his partner was about to be ejected from the area. He was not required to. He shouldn't have been, in fact. Looking down on you, Kachan. I don't look down on you. I look to you as someone I have to beat. Kachan was rewarded with the chance to attempt a punch that Bakugo was able to avoid at the last second, as he had anticipated a close-quarters attack in response. It was worthwhile because it still put him in a position where Izuku could kick in. I never really thought I could be a hero, even as I dreamed it. You never doubted yourself. What did everyone think of you? Tell me. Bakugo yelled. I don't care what those extras thought. While he was using the gauntlets that the support class had made for him. Knowing that the spirit required wet skin to function, Izuku began to worry when he smelled a particularly strong concentration of Kachan's perspiration. Izuku challenged, what about everyone here? What do they think of you? I still don't care. I'm the future #1 here, not them. Do they think you're amazing? Do they think they have to keep their eyes on you? Or do they think you're a threat? Someone to face? Certainly, they can't ignore you. You're the brightest thing here, even if it's just an explosion. Uraraka wondered why Iida wasn't attempting to push her out of bounds. He would most likely be successful by now. Despite being stronger and faster than her, he appeared preoccupied. To be honest, so did she. Something inside of her told her to turn to face Bakugo. He made her feel threatened. She felt, somehow, that Iida shared her sentiments. She dared to look at him and saw Izuku yelling at the boy. Was Bakugo's emotional influence what Deku had meant earlier? If so, was Izuku attempting to take advantage of it? Reflecting on what he had said earlier, experiencing the same energy they had already generated, she took advantage of Iida's distraction by kicking him toward Bakugo. The only response Kachan had to Izuku's tirade was, shut up and die already. No, I can only say that I've been paying attention, Kachan, to everything you've done to me. All the cruelty you laid down on me, all the inspiration you gave to me. Whether it was you or your spirit, I will pay each one in kind. He hadn't even realized that he was just a word away from uttering Death Wolf's oath, but he was aware of the spirits who had belonged to Death Wolf. One disappeared to deliver a message after a conversation that would have made no sense to any human listening, even if they were fluent in the first tongue. Izuku did see that Iida had been momentarily knocked down by his partner, which allowed him to leap toward the taller boy at the exact moment when Kachan yelled, die, and detonated the largest explosion to date. Aizawa knew full well that by now he ought to have broken up the fight. But he had been impacted by something, and he was looking at this Bakugo kid, curious to see what he would do. The explosive boy blew up his own partner in an attack that was far too powerful for a simple spar, cursing himself for allowing it to get so far in the first place, and he declared the match over with neither side winning. He had no idea what it was, but he finally declared it irrational and erased the explosive boy's quirk. Kota hoped to be paired with his pack mate, but he was realistic enough to realize that it wouldn't make mathematical sense. Therefore, when he revealed that he was working with Shinshida, there was not even the slightest surprise. All he wanted to do now was curl up and hide. Even though he had an issue because of his Araka instincts, it wasn't just them this time. When he saw how the teams would be set up, he understood that he would be up against Ishido and Aoyama. He didn't have strong feelings for the pink girl, but would the Angisha follow the rules or band together to eliminate the Forsaken despite Nedzu's warning in this matchup, where one peer was on his side and another peer was against him? He pushed through his panic and entered the arena, braced for chaos. With anxiety and excitement blending in her aroma, Ishido cautiously asked Aoyama, so, do you know anything about our opponents? Aoyama tried not to wrinkle his nose in reaction, but it only made the sharp unpleasantness coming from her worse. He grinned and said, I know quite a bit, mademoiselle. Our savage Shinshida is indeed a savage, with incredible strength and even more incredible sense of smell in his current state. But it's nothing compared to what he can do if he goes all out with his even larger form. Even larger. Our friend can get stronger and faster if he wants to. However, he has a little difficulty controlling himself. I understand that if he doesn't make a serious effort to attack someone every few seconds, he'll lose the stronger one for his current state. It was obvious that Ishido was trying to do something with that knowledge, but it seemed painful to her to think about it too much. Plus, he heals quickly. So quickly, in fact, that I would go as far as to suggest not holding back for anything. Go fully lethal, he can handle it. This suggestion didn't seem to be taken seriously by her. It was her loss, but whatever. The other one, on top of being no slouch himself strength-wise, can talk to animals. I don't know if it's a second quirk or not, but he also has the uncanny ability to see your weakest points, know where to apply force to hurt you the most. The whole, herd not knowing, thing was more annoying now than it had been for a long time, but he lied with enough ease. Shinshida grinned at the lone person nearby, fully aware that his teeth made the smile more menacing than a growl. He then used his savagery gifts to prolong her instinctive response to his primal urge, allowing her to see the predator in front of her, even though she was not entirely aware of her feelings. She was pleased when she had to stifle a shiver. Sadly unaffected, the Forsaken gave him a disapproving glance but remained silent, directing his enmity toward the ivory claw. That worked perfectly for the Predator King. He had no trouble figuring out who was the stronger of the pure spies here, but it would likely be more in line with the Confederacy's unity if he faced the human and Aoyama tried to resolve the Forsaken. He figured it might be the fake Frenchman's punishment for not killing them sooner. As a result, when Aizawa-sensei gave the order to begin, he used his strength gifts to leap forward much faster than the girl had anticipated and swung a paw at her faster than a typical human could respond. She twisted out of his path and skillfully caught herself before her clumsy dodge tripped her up or put her in a more vulnerable position, and to her credit, she moved out of the way enough that it barely hit. The girl's footwork was superb. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be sufficient. Aoyama was afraid that by repressing his urge to transform into Dalu and tear the useless slave of the bitch mother to pieces, he would become sufficiently distracted to make the battle difficult, but the slave was stalling and making no effort to get closer. In addition to appearing to be paralyzed by nerves, he also appeared to be surveying the field. The boy was a coward, unable to assume any of his wolf forms. At least that's what Aoyama deduced from contrasting Kota's current behavior with what he had witnessed in class and their previous altercation. Even though it was tempting to wonder what caused this contradictory character or why he wasn't calling on any rats or insects in the building with his nature gifts, Aoyama decided to attack first, taking advantage of the distance to send a laser beam bursting from the fetish around his stomach and taking the initiative in the fight. Kota was unable to approach the pure. Every time he tried, the stories his uncle used to tell him suddenly came to mind and made him stop dead in his tracks. His instinct as a human was to run. His instincts as an Iraka told him to hide. Whether he was a teammate or not, his father wolf-derived instincts told him to transform into Garu and tear the monsters to shreds. Kota failed to come up with a suitable plan and was stuck trying to force them down, noting that all three would be worthless for their current examination. When Aoyama suggested that Shinshida healed quickly enough to withstand deadly doses of acid, Mina had assumed he was being careless or making a joke, but as he dismissed small spray after small spray without even flinching, she began to believe that perhaps this battle would need to become a little more brutal. The way things were going, with her barely avoiding blow after blow and him unharmed, was definitely not sustainable. He was aware that she was wearing out more quickly than he was. She wasn't winning a war of attrition, and she wasn't very good at coming up with fresh plans on the spot. She was not a thinker, she was a doer. As a result, her action was fairly straightforward. She leapt out of the way of Shinshida's subsequent swipe, fell into a cartwheel, and then launched herself to Aoyama's position using a back handspring. Perhaps they could fight together if she couldn't manage this conflict on her own. Aoyama had a different idea. I am handling this foolish peasant by myself, mon chéri. But if I go down while you're still fighting Kota, then Shinshida will take you down next. She quipped. Aoyama screamed, "Pardon-moi," before aiming his naval laser at the massive hero student as Shinshida ran up to do just that during their brief argument. Now that Aoyama was preoccupied with his fellow pure, Kota knew it was time to attack. Either now or never, it was good to hide, but only until the hunter had his chance. He utilized his new moon gifts to locate Aoyama's armor's weak spots before charging, reminding himself of what had initially gotten him into the hero course. Even though he couldn't call on it at the moment, he could feel the wolf's instinct inside him propel him forward much more quickly than he had previously believed he could run in Hishu form. He felt aggressive, unrestrained, and free of his usual worries, but he wasn't sure where to charge. If he could focus, he could see that he was going to rush Shinshida instead of Aoyama, which is an unacceptable tactical mistake in this exercise, especially since he had no hunter's instinct at all for Mina. The armored one and the pink one are the prey, not the pure in Dalu form, he tried to convince himself. He paused because of that hesitation, allowing Aoyama to see his forward advance and fire. If Shinshida had not been in the same situation, he would have cursed the Forsaken for failing to take proper advantage of the opportunity. His bloodlust was increasing as he gave into his desire to fight, likely more than was suitable even for a basic training exercise against a human, but he was conscious of his Forsaken status and could control his instincts after smelling another of the people here. You were the one on this mission for that reason. Unfortunately, he was suddenly confronted by a laser beam and an enormous glob of acid exploding against his flesh, so his opponents did not just wait there and let him sort his thoughts out. He was only able to avoid Kuruth by partially giving into his instincts and assuming Garu form. The combination of the frustration of already having to suppress his instincts, the rage of working with a Forsaken cur, and the pain of what he had just gone through as a result of trying to suppress said frustration were all about to force him into Kuruth. Aoyama was completely frightened. In Garu, a predator king was a terrifying sight when you were its ally. When one was an enemy, he didn't have complete faith in Aizawa-sensei's ability to protect them. Fortunately for him, his technical enemy was also focused on the predator king rather than the enemies he was supposed to be fighting. It did not help that his ally in this fright seemed to be frozen in terror, likely an effect of the Pure's expanded savagery gifts. Koda's instincts had apparently been roused to their worst by Shinshida's actions, and the boy had no desire to continue, preferring instead to call on the rats that were scuttling through the nearby sewers to come to his aid and defend him against the terrifying creature. When he realized that the two had lost sight of their true purpose, he took Mina by the arm and muttered, "Let's run for it and let them handle each other." As he engaged his opponent, Koda persuaded the rats to charge from the rear and latch on, even though they were understandably even more frightened of the monstrous form in front of them than he was. Perhaps with their help, he could make a valiant final stand against the pure menace and die valiantly, like a great champion of old, even though he couldn't win, at least in Hishu form. Even without the Azlu inside their teacher shutting down his nature gifts and sending the rats running in fear without Koda's influence, Aizawa-sensei's yell of, "Stop!" was more than enough to wake Koda from his daze. However, before their teacher's words could register, Shinshida swiped at the other hero student. Sighing to himself, Aizawa tried to process this development. "Shinshida, if you attack again then you'll be expelled," he said. He had been impressed by Shinshida so far, but he would be a liability as a hero if he had that little control over his quirk. Next was Koda, who appeared to harbor a personal grudge against his teammate. While this was undoubtedly something to deal with, Koda also needed to learn how to ignore it, regardless of how serious it was. Pro heroes had to constantly collaborate with people they didn't like, and allowing that kind of behavior to interfere with fieldwork could result in fatalities. After that performance, Koda wasn't really sure if he should have apologized or not. His classmates appeared to be a little afraid of him. He could see their fear, but it was more focused on Shinshida than on him. Was it really that hard to let go of old grudges? Did he truly deserve to be a hero in this situation? He told himself that he had to remain strong for his pack, glancing at Izuku, who only watched with concern. Perhaps he could speak with the boy later and receive some consolation from someone who truly understood. The fights among the other students were largely unremarkable. At least no one attempted to tear apart a teammate or detonated an explosion too large for their arena. The fact that he was now stuck with a class full of troublesome kids made Aizawa sigh. Yes, it was going to be a year. On paper, Nedzu had a ton of administrative work to do, the kind of ridiculous paperwork that would overwhelm any person, even a bright one. The simplicity of it bored him. Enough boredom to observe the shroud's movement. What is this? He pondered. He twisted his rat-like nose from side to side, trying to detect any strange smells, and sure enough, there they were. The shroud was being tormented by something, making something that shouldn't have been a locust count. He sighed and got up to face the family, or oneself. Humans wanted to see it, but he didn't need to waste time on their standards because, as a spirit, he knew enough about his relationship with the rest of his former body. They whispered, "Orphera is dead." When Nedzu was sure they could hear him, he answered irrelevantly. "Back then, we were at fault. We are still. The more the shroud feeds us, the more it will hurt to gnaw it apart." As might be expected, his words had little effect. "We chew. Beshalu is who we are. We can eat up the skin world." Nedzu skipped the usual argument to find out why they chose to give him a headache at this particular moment and instead put a paw to his head in a gesture he had seen people do when they were angry. To the principal's surprise, they replied, "The baleful hound rides again. And we are impacted by that because, until we are in a position to usurp him, They replied, "We will serve him. We'll be restored after that." Although he was somewhat surprised to learn that someone similar to the rest of his body would serve that monstrosity, the notion that he fooled himself into believing he was cunning enough to take advantage of the circumstance without even having a clear plan. Yes, that sounded exactly like him when he was whole. In the first place, it caused him to be split up. Did you really think that something so stupid would bring us back together? Nedzu sort of reprimanded himself. They responded that we gave them a peaceful chance before using other means to compel their hand. Before realizing that they were trying to gnaw their way into his school, Nedzu pondered what threat they might have believed they could pose. He flashed his teeth. "I won't allow you to harm my pupils." Unfortunately, they appeared to be pleased. "You want to keep your vassals safe. Do you really think you're that strong?" Naturally, from the standpoint of a spirit, the plan made perfect sense. After all, how could one claim to have vassals if they were not protected? When something you are unable to confront threatens your vassals, you respond to the threat by tolerating anything less than harm to those under you. You manage to preserve the precise language of your agreement, if not the spirit ironically, rather than fighting in a suicidal manner like humans might or deserting them. Nedzu replied, "I guess we'll have to see." He planned 2 different phone calls and stopped talking. One to Mighty Wolf and one to Aizawa, to ask for a favor he wouldn't fully comprehend, to use the Azlu to seal up what his other bodies had gnawed through, but he could find a way to use it for his employees' benefit. Hopefully, whatever Forsaken was still able to communicate with the hero. These days, the elders of Bone Shadow hardly ever met. There were a lot of things to discover and learn, but there weren't many resources available. They were the tribe of explorers, but they were also the tribe of tradition keeping, and in this instance, that meant the custom of having these discussions in person. And we are certain that the Sprits recognized this boy. Yes, the pup was chosen by spirits aligned with Death Wolf. He has already been accepted among the Bone Shadows, as far as they're concerned. While we may accept the spirits' judgments, he will be accepted when he has proven himself worthy to us. They all mumbled for a while before one of them finally mentioned the issue that really troubled them. The boy was bidden and introduced to Uritha society by Mighty Wolf, the same supposed Forsaken who plays along with the human's profession for ridden. Wearing a ridiculous costume while displaying Mother Luna's gifts to us like he was in a dog show. This is not the time to litigate Mighty Wolf's actions. The Blood Talon elders have already agreed that, so long as the herd does not know, he is free to continue playing at being a comic book character. "Whatever we may think of the matter," he said, his tone of voice precisely expressing his thoughts on the subject. "But we must bring it up, because we have to decide whether our tribe should allow the same tomfoolery as Blood Wolf's children." One person snarled at the other, "Are you calling Blood Wolf a fool?" "No, certainly not, but his values, and the role that his children fill, are different than ours. Whether it's right or not, the role of a so-called pro-hero, and that of a Blood Talon match up more smoothly than our own. How is he supposed to find the secrets of the spirit world while he's off fighting mortals infected by spirits in the skin world? How is he supposed to protect spirits from humanity's actions when humanity is paying him to act solely in their interests? A Blood Talon may be able to be a pro-hero, but a Bone Shadow certainly cannot. If he wants to join with Death Wolf, then he needs to change his mortal profession." A fourth countered, "But the spirits already approve of him. We should give him the same opportunity for initiation we'd give any sincerely seeking ghost wolf." Sincerely seeking is exactly my point. If he's following in Mighty Wolf's footsteps, then he sees our gifts as tools to be part of so-called hero society. He hasn't truly embraced the wolf. "Then he will fail," retorted the person who had argued for Izuku. "But if he succeeds, then he has shown himself just as worthy as any of us. No matter what we may think of it." Izuku was thrilled to be dining with friends, but he was also a little let down that Kota didn't want to eat with his other pals. He couldn't help but eagerly listen in as Iida regaled them with tales of his brother because this was so different from what he had experienced thus far. "And that's why I always wanted to be just like him," Tenya concluded. Uraraka said, "Wow," with admiration. Izuku questioned, "What makes you want to be a hero?" "Oh, the money." She explained her family's financial circumstances and how she could assist with her quirk if she were only permitted to do so after they both looked at each other in surprise for a moment. "It's so strange," she said, "going from my old place to somewhere like this, where some of the silverware is actually silver." Izuku was told she was telling the truth when he heard Aoyama whelp in pain for a brief moment before the flamboyant boy obviously tried to stifle it. Izuku nearly looked down in horror before realizing he was using wooden chopsticks. Even though he and his apparent enemy were still only slightly in love, he was certain that this amounted to hiding from the herd, so he tried his hardest to divert his friend's attention from it by frantically bringing up whatever he could before the blaring alarms took care of that issue for him. The old creature would concede that it wasn't the most oblique method of leaving a message, but it made sure the message reached the right person. Well, he would handle it as usual if others discovered it along the way. With Mother Luna's wrath and the claws Father Wolf had given him. What the hell? Yelled someone. As they witnessed what could only be described as a massacre on their campus, that hapless student was able to capture the atmosphere of the school perfectly. The only thing that lessened the horror was the fact that the feathers and bones strewn throughout the blood and gore that covered their field made it obvious that there were only animal remains, not human remains, and that many of them were going to lose the lunch they had just eaten. With a shout, Present Mike said, "Okay, listeners. I'm going to need all of you young and upcoming heroes to get back and avoid this area so your staff can figure out what's going on. By the way, if we find out that any of you did this a prank, you will expelled once we find out, but maybe you can get some mercy if you confess now." He reiterated his demand that the students leave the scene and return to their classrooms after no one accepted his offer. Normally Izuku would have joined them, but he was too preoccupied with the mess before him, mainly because he thought it wasn't a mess at all. He noticed that the bones were dispersed in a way that revealed order to it. "That means you too, listener." Izuku barely had time to feel ashamed after Present Mike pointed him out directly before Iida seized him and reprimanded him for being preoccupied. Izuku persisted in attempting to fit the pattern he had observed together, while Uraraka reprimanded Iida for failing to take into account his emotions in light of the horrific scene they had just seen. There was a message being delivered there, so the slaughter was most definitely not random. He had noticed that all three of the pig skulls had been facing north, and that a group of smaller birds had been arranged in a circle around a larger one, despite the fact that their bones were too widely spaced to be that clear. Somewhere to the north, young people circling the old. Was the elder Uratha calling to invite them to a meeting? Or the pure elders sending a message to Shinshida or Aoyama? Even though he was positive it somehow involved their kind, he had no idea which was more likely. At some point Mighty Wolf had alluded to the use of dead animals to leave subliminal messages that the herd would never comprehend, but he never went into detail. Koa might be aware. Naturally, he believed that the elders needed a refresher on what subtlety meant if it was intended to be a message too subtle for the herd. Since Nedzu was absent for whatever caused the mess on the front field, Aizawa was irritated that he was erasing a random location on his behalf. When he discovered that no one else had any information, he wasn't sure if he should be more or less irritated. They were also unable to reflect on the incident because the security systems and cameras had all conveniently been installed on the Fritz at the exact moment it occurred. It was obvious that some freak had targeted Ua, and they appeared powerless to stop it. He was afraid of the media's reaction if they found out about this, and he was even more afraid of what would happen if the freak decided he wasn't content with animal blood the next time and wanted to display a corpse from a student or a civilian. He didn't want to think that way, but whoever did this was cunning and mentally unstable. The thrill, which might be their only rational incentive, would be too irresistible to keep them from striking again. Nedzu said, "I don't think we have to worry about a repeat," as if he didn't agree with his profile. Aizawa scowled and pushed back. "This all looks like the actions of a weirdo who gets off on disturbing people and getting away with it or some sort of cultist psycho. Neither are they kind to relent after a single success. There's a third option, however, and that's that they wanted to leave a message for a particular person. If said person received the message, then we don't have to worry about it." Weird way to leave a message, Vlad King said before Aizawa could respond with a retort that was nearly identical. And either way, such a message implies a threat. That's even worse. The teachers all turned to stare at Nedzu, perplexed by his casual attitude toward this issue. Nothing about his actions at the moment made sense, even though they knew he had a propensity to pick things up faster than they did and frequently saw things that they didn't. The eyes of Aizawa narrowed. "I'm guessing that you're so certain because you know what the message was, who it was for, and maybe even who sent it." Nedzu laughed. He'd known the rodent long enough to pick up on the tiniest hint of covered nervousness, but to others it would have seemed reasonable and plainly amused. Yes, that clarified it. Before the principal could gather his thoughts, Aizawa continued on his line, "Was the message for you?" There was no other way to outsmart the cunning beast. Regretfully, He proved to be inaccurate. No, of course not. I can't see anything there that was meant for my eyes. That doesn't mean that I don't have my suspicions, but spreading mere suspicions at this point will only cause doubt and confusion. Let me know your thoughts, and then we can take the best possible steps forward to prevent this from occurring in the future. Kota told Izuku in the first tongue, the Bone Shadow Elders want to meet you, as they made their way back to class. What? He wanted to yell, but restrained himself. I don't know the details. I'm not that informed with how other tribes send messages, but that was clearly from the Bone Shadows, as the pig skulls facing north showed, and the young birds surrounding an older bird were a call for a gathering. There were probably some details in entrails, but I don't know how to read them. Izuku had a lot of questions, but he began with one of the more practical ones. Aren't there more subtle ways to request a meeting? Yes, actually, most of the times when we use dead animals to communicate, we leave them out in ways that the herd would identify as a natural death. One would usually have to be in the know to even think to look for a message, nonetheless understand it. I have no idea why they did it this way. He continued with another relevant question, assuming that Kota was really no longer knowledgeable on that front. Where are they, so I can meet them? I don't know exactly. Koa quickly corrected Izuku after noticing his terrified expression, saying, I mean, they're somewhere in the woods to the north of here. I think I remember the signs they use to mark their territory's borders, sort of. I just can't give you specific directions. Izuku felt a little more at ease after that. And I guess you already hinted that you have no idea what they want to talk about, huh? Kota gave a headshake. Aoyama and Shinshida conferred on what to do after confirming that neither could crack the Forsaken's code. Shinshida noted, the Forsaken have made a move on the Beshalu's territory, they have struck. Any claim to neutrality is absurd at this point. Yet I suspect he will still claim one, until violence occurs, Mon Ami, replied Aoyama. More violence than you've already displayed, at least. As all Dire Wolf's followers and really all Uritha should, albeit at a somewhat inconvenient time, Shinshida had given in to the wolf and had no interest in reiterating this conflict. He could take responsibility for the loss of control, but he didn't want to argue, especially with an ivory claw, about his instincts and lack of desire to control them. Before venting about purity, he would most likely point the finger at his grandparents or something equally unrelated. Instead, he questioned his purported comrade, does it really serve the Confederacy to sit back and let things happen? No, which is why it's essential that we send one of our own. I have reason to believe that the other Beshalu nearby are less concerned with neutrality than our dear principal, and that they might be willing to work as Angusha. The Predator King found it increasingly useful to hear the boy's plans, and Shinshida had to concede that he had underestimated the Ivory Claw. Perhaps just enough to justify keeping quiet. Kurogiri told Tenko, the fire-touched elders will meet with you in a month's time, they are, unexpectedly busy otherwise. While we're waiting, there is a matter that's been brought to the Confederacy's attention, by two of our moles in UA. An opportunity for the pure to make their mark has arisen. Tenko was sort of listening, but his name was the main thing on his mind. That man who didn't deserve to be called father gave him the name of a pitiful slave, Tenko Shimura. It should be his truth that he was no longer that scared, pitiful little boy if it was his truth that he had accepted a new life. No longer, but not Tenko, but Tamura, he replied, much to Kurogiri's perplexity. I am no longer Tenko. With Rabid Wolf's blessing, I know myself now as Tamura, and I no longer recognize myself as the son of Shimura. Very well, Tamura, the Ridden said, with a hint of derision that Tamura heard. What will you do with these plans? And so things started. Enact them, I suppose. When a game gives you a choice, does anyone really go for the no option? Ordinarily, Izuku believed his mother was forgiving enough to allow him to run wild in the forest, regardless of how teeming with vicious werewolves it might be. After all, she had allowed him to meet mighty wolves so many times without question, and she had little idea how dangerous the woods could be. Unfortunately, the Bone Shadows had also frightened the herd, including his poor mother, in their rush to get Izuku to talk to them. When he got home, she squeaked, I heard about that ritual sacrifice at your school. We're going to adopt some measures, even if it's just for my own sanity, to keep you safe. I don't want whatever psycho put up that display coming after my baby. Izuku Midoriya consequently had to set up an alert on his phone and constantly update his mother on his whereabouts. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have been all that bad, no more restrictive than most teenagers had to deal with. but there was a problem in that there was no clear explanation for why he would be traveling through a forest, one that was probably not closely monitored by normal human civilization. Before Izuku pointed out that they were friends and that Kota spent a lot of time outside, Kota, not wanting to disappoint his packmate, came up with a variety of ideas about evasion and stealth, including spoofing his phone, leaving it somewhere his mother wouldn't notice, and sneaking around. He could simply explain that he was going on a nature walk with his friend. Kota assumed that was also effective. As they got closer to the wood's edge, Kota's nervousness, which he displayed whenever he interacted with others, began to affect the hunter in darkness as well as him in his element. One of the few places he felt at ease was a forest. Here, instead of navigating the thousands of impossible social situations that human society required him to do, he could be himself, let his primal urge take over, and be one with nature in a way that he simply could not be anywhere else. Unfortunately, they were just as frightening to talk to as people, and other Yuritha also frequented them for essentially the same reason. Indeed, they were somewhat more comprehensible. The majority of them adhered to strict customs, and he had grown up in them, but they were still human beings with all of that wolf instinct and spirit essence, and people were frightening. Generally speaking, werewolves were more frightening. Kota noted, those scratches are too uniform to have been made by a wild animal, using his desire to assist his friend as a diversion from his worries. Not any set by themselves, but if you look there's a clear pattern in the way they're arranged. Izuku looked to where his packmate pointed and nodded in awe. Although there were many claw marks, they appeared haphazard, as if they were made by a bear, and he honestly did not believe he would have noticed it without the other's help. If one counted out the claw marks on the surrounding trees, they formed a clear pattern, but only if one looked at them holistically. That is, until he focused and tilted to the right angle, where he could see that one was slashed sideways, then another down, and then another sideways. Izuku questioned, what does it mean? We're at the boundaries of a claimed territory, Kota replied. We need to be polite about entering it. In a seemingly polite gesture, Kota leaned back and let out a howl. Izuku did as he said. Despite his assurance, Kota's legs remained motionless as he said, now that we've established that we aren't sneaking and are trying to hide ourselves, we just walk forward. The boy was looking straight ahead and was obviously trying to move forward, but something was holding him back. Fear, judging by the trembling of his arms. Kota, you've done a lot for me, Izuku remarked when he realized this. The elders asked me for, though, you really don't have to do any more. I'll go on ahead. Kota shook his head, but it appeared that he was unable to express any disapproval. By putting their arms together as they walked, they eventually discovered a settlement. A bird's caw, a twig breaking off. It seemed like the only sounds they could hear, so the farther they went into the woods, the more they responded to these odd noises. As they continued walking, the forest grew eerily silent until they could hear nothing at all, save for the grunt coming from behind them. Swiftly turning around, they saw a huge beast with a hideous face that only took a moment for them to identify as Erin's form. They attempted to meet its eyes but were condemned. They had to turn their eyes away from it. Both of the boys' faces flushed, and they made an effort to turn away as its shape reshaped itself into a naked woman. The odd group was surrounded by several smaller wolves, one of whom brought a crudely sewn animal skin cloak to the woman, who made the smallest attempt to dress herself before glaring at the boys. Black Wolf's child may remain here, so long as he shows respect and does not feed from our locus without permission. As to the one recognized by the spirits, the one whom they say spoke Death Wolf's oath, even if indirectly, and in a modern language, she appeared disgusted with the notion. We ask if you choose to insult us by doing so, or if you think that you're ready to embrace Kamduas. Izuku was always cursing his stuttering, nervous habits, but never more so than when this woman presented him with a significant option and her presence completely frightened him. They obviously wanted him to join the Bone Shadows, but it took him a moment to process what she had said, and would feel offended if he didn't. He had spoken their oath, but when? Had he accidentally sworn allegiance to a tribe in casual conversation? Is that even possible? His knees trembled. He swallowed. The woman saw this, but she showed no sympathy. Speak pup, or admit to mockery. None of her fairest tribes value cowardice. Since the wolves around them appeared to be as impatient as she was, he really made an effort to heed her advice. He steeled himself, looking to Kota for motivation, then considering what Mighty Wolf would do. I meant no insult, whether I spoke Death Wolf's oath or not. I respect the Bone Shadows, or at least what I know of them, but the decision to join a tribe isn't exactly something I can do lightly. There was a level of contentment on her face that wasn't there before, even though she didn't really smile or show any signs of joy. Her response was a wise observation. She approached him and then walked around him, assessing him. This story is true. Before the world was broken, when the spirit wolf and the skin world were one, Kamui's always wanted to know. She followed the gazelles when they ran, and the birds when they flew. She traversed the highest mountains, and delved into the lowest caves. And everything she saw, she loved. What she loved, she wanted to know more about. She found out everything she could, and what she could not find out she went to her Farah to learn more. Sometimes he told her what she wanted her to know, other times he guided her to find out for herself, but at all times he respected her hunt for knowledge. She ceased her circling and arrived at Izuku. We may or may not be the actual descendants of Death Wolf, but we are her children because we asked her to be our teacher. That is the core of our tribe. We hunt, not just for meat, but for secrets. We traverse the depths of the spirit world, we cross the veil to learn, even more importantly to understand. Do you wish to understand? Izuku nodded clumsily. Didn't they all? She went on. I would understand more of you before I continue. Hup, what I understand is that you wish to be one of the costumed champions of the ridden herd. What I wish to understand is why. At the smallest movement of her head, she nodded to him, and he took his turn to talk. Luckily, he was able to respond to this question without hesitation. I've seen people suffer, and I've seen the smiles on their faces when heroes end their suffering. I want to be the cause of those smiles. Does the hero, as they call them, bring the suffering to an end? Are disasters truly prevented, or is pain merely delayed for another day? Izuku just needed to give it a brief thought. It makes things better, even if it doesn't fix everything, or stop bad things from happening in the future. I can make the worst day of someone's life better, and that's worth it. And to the spirits who empower people to harm others, what do you think you would do to them? Izuku replied, the same way I would treat a human villain. Those who have done wrong, I will fight, while those who do good I won't. And how do you know the difference? I don't. It's why I'm still learning. She had an unidentifiable face. After a few minutes of silence, she finally said, you were brought to our attention by a spirit who'd been observing you. Find this spirit, and figure out why it was interested in you. If you can do that, then we will welcome you among the bone shadows. If you cannot, then we will assume you are either uninterested or unworthy. You have 2 weeks. He was not as wise as he believed after consuming the knowledge spirit from their other body. Since he was so stupidly stubborn, they had expected him to seal up the hole in the shroud they left. That was the only logical thing to do. Naturally, he had also taken measures to make sure that they couldn't simply enter his priceless school from the spirit world. During his lengthy stay in the skin world, he appeared to have forgotten that there were alternative ways to achieve their goals. They weren't restricted to a single realm, and his school was too big to keep everything safe. As a result, a group of rat spirits on a mission ate their way through the shroud, finding a homeless man to eat and turn into their own, a freshly deceased body to fill with parts of their body, and massive swarms of common rats that had accumulated over decades of filth and neglect in human cities. They then twisted and humanized their bodies. They were ready to attack. Since their fateful encounter, Kota and Izuku had been trying to figure out what spirit might have been watching Izuku when he took his oath, or how they might be able to do so. The options they currently had were nothing, zilch, and nada. If the spirits were watching from the spirit world, Izuku probably couldn't have noticed them anyway, and he had been too preoccupied with his battle with Bakugo to notice any at the time. He didn't think that would be a good enough excuse for the elders. That did, of course, raise the very relevant question of whether he truly wanted to prove himself in front of the Bone Shadows. Kota had stated unequivocally that selecting a different tribe was perfectly acceptable. Even though his rejection of the Bone Shadows' offer may have come across as impolite, the Forsaken valued choice, and there were undoubtedly those who would condemn him if he failed the initiation. And Uritha had to be in charge of his own search, but he also had to find himself. They seemed to assert that it was what set them apart from the pure. To further complicate matters, this significant decision had no effect on his regular routine. He still needed to concentrate on his studies and his goal of becoming a pro-hero. That was the irksome part of life. Izuku Midoriya, Eladoth Ghost Wolf, tried his best to seat everyone comfortably and in order, but he ended up walking groggily toward the bus with too little sleep from worrying the night before. Iida reprimanded him for this. He sat down and listened to his classmates chatting among themselves, taking his friend's criticism in stride. Hey, Midoriya, the girl who he vaguely knew had the frog spirit inside of her. Not that her changed appearance didn't reveal that, spoke abruptly to him. I remember you saying something to Bakugo, right at the end of that rant about how everyone had to pay attention to him. Looking back, it was kind of weird how right you were. I couldn't keep my eyes off of him, and not in a weird way. Putting her head to the side, she continued, but what I'm really curious is your claim that you would pay, each in kind, whether it was Bakugo or his spirit. Each feels like you're talking about multiple people, but weren't you just talking about Bakugo? Izuku calmed down. In retrospect, that was far more suspicious than any other answer he could have given. If he had been endowed with social graces, it would have been simple enough to dismiss it as a spontaneous remark or an awkward metaphor he had come up with at the time. Unfortunately, he stammered in response, which made her look at him even more awkwardly. Well, I mean, what is a person, after all? Are we really just the same as our spirits, or are we just bodies floating on this celestial organ with spirits merely inhabiting us, or does the spirit exist at all? I mean, it's all just conjecture and metaphor, isn't it? She appeared perplexed, which was understandable given that Izuku was unable to understand what he was saying. He struggled to relax and tried to concentrate on the first thing that came to him that resembled a coherent line of thought. It didn't make sense, but he ran with it because he had to use it. I guess that I meant his quirk, and how spirited it can be. I mean, he can be really intimidating, with how strong and dazzling it is, but it has its weaknesses, like he has to activate it against wet skin or how you sleep in the cold. She hadn't told him about these things. He had discovered that fact by using the right to read the spirit within her information. The way she looked at him made her realize how little they had previously interacted and how unlikely it was that he was familiar with her quirk. He recovered quickly enough to say, I guessed, that's all, because you look like a frog and frogs don't do well in the cold. Of course, you might be completely different, seeing as that you're a human and obviously warm-blooded. No, you guessed correctly, I do have problems with the cold. That's a really specific observation. Did you really just guess a weakness of mine like that? And you had so much confidence in it for a second there. He replied in a half-honest manner, I've made a habit of studying quirks. Sometimes, after obsessing over them enough, you can start to guess the details of others' quirks with an impressive amount of accuracy. Really, what else would you guess about me from just your observations? He sighed with relief as he reflected on what the right had shown him and realized that his hobby of keeping notebooks would actually be helpful for once. In addition to having the physical properties of a frog, you also have some influence over normal frogs, and possibly other amphibians. I don't know whether you can control them or not, but I'll bet they don't react to you like a normal human. Asui appeared ready to challenge his assertions, but she put a finger to her chin in contemplation. As she acknowledged, I actually don't know, I've never really tried it. What makes you think I can? Izuku was now frantically trying to come up with a lie once more. Well, I thought that it just made sense. The frogs would see as one of their own. Frogs aren't social animals, she pushed back. But humans are, and you're kind of both. Try it out. The worst that could happen is you'd look silly for a bit. Izuku let out a sigh of relief as she gave the situation careful thought. He reminded himself to exercise caution, even though he was still convinced that it was helpful to know more about the peculiarities of others than oneself. This might be difficult. The unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, was as spectacular as most of UA's constructions. Where UA obtained the funding for such initiatives was a mystery. The children, accustomed as they were to the excesses of the school, entered with a look of wonder on their faces as they gazed around at the various ruins, one engulfed in a never-ending fire, another a full-sized ship in the middle of sinking into a gigantic pool, still another a smashed mass of rocks, and still more and more. The woman in the spacesuit's demand for their attention was the only thing that was able to shake them out of their reverie. Uraraka exclaimed, "Oh my gosh, it's the rescue hero 13. She's my idol. I've modeled so much of my plans to be a hero on her." Before Izuku could realize what he knew about her, 13 started giving them lectures about the value of rescue work and how their peculiarities could be used for both good and bad. A strange feeling interrupted his thoughts as she explained how her black hole quirk. Izuku wondered what kind of spirit it actually was, could kill someone with ease but also clear debris and make places safe for civilians. When the black hole she summoned didn't go away, 13 began to panic, but he felt it more deeply and viscerally than most of the other students in the class. Prey. Before a rat burst through 13's black hole and started munching on its exterior, he pondered what that might mean, since there was nothing to hunt here. Everyone's initial reaction was to stare in confusion because that didn't make sense. However, when the renowned rescue hero attempted to grab at the creature, it screeched and more rats began to pour through, scurrying over one another, biting, and screeching as they tried to crawl through the small hole she had made in reality. The only way they cooperated was by trying to gnaw at the hole's edges, which made it larger and larger. Eraserhead, cried 13 in despair. 13 was no longer in control of her quirk, and the hole was closing more quickly than the rats could chew through it, but it didn't simply disappear as it should have. Their teacher attempted to stop it, and he succeeded. The swarm wasn't just counting on the stupid Ridden's gauntlet hole to open. If that had been the case, they could have been stopped with ease. No, in their own opinion, their plan was far more clever. This building needed to be maintained, and maintenance needed personnel. There were so many mortals that not all of them noticed when a dead man began to walk again, even though lost brother Nedzu was shrewd enough to keep anyone under their influence away from his domains. One group of men, dressed as janitors and easily dismissed, shuffled in behind the so-called pro-heroes as they were preoccupied with their weaker brothers crossing the gauntlet. It would take close inspection to notice how strange their movements were, as though they were a group of animals attempting to clumsily move a balloon from the inside out. Behind them, still stalking from the shadows, were two of what the Uritha had called sewer slave drivers. They would have passed themselves off as having a dramatic and unfortunate mutation quirk elsewhere, but here they waited in case these powerful and trained Ridden turned out to be more trouble than they had anticipated. Taller than a grown man, the bipedal rats knew that, despite their desire to squeak with anticipation, they should remain perfectly silent. Being the most powerful members of their family, they could take a host as just one and change it to suit their needs in a way that the others couldn't. Another person here could perform even better, but he was waiting even longer. Hopefully he didn't need to intervene. Izuku detected an unpleasant odor, and a cursory inspection revealed that Kota, Aoyama, and Shinshida had all detected the same scent. Behind them, too, came the same smell that came from those invading rat spirits. Ever the responsible one, Iida was looking to prepare a possible evacuation when he saw the teachers struggling. The first herd member to notice the janitors entering behind them was Iida. The boy insisted, "This is not safe for civilians. I'm going to have to ask you to remain calm but leave the area, preferably contacting assistance from outside." Izuku did his best to warn Iida not to approach, but it was too late when the janitor ignored him and instead stumbled forward. In an attempt to help the man stand, Iida grabbed him, but as a dozen hideous rats leapt out to bite the boy, who was so desperate to act like a proper gentleman, the man's flesh exploded. As a number of the other students either panicked or acted, Shinshida yelled, "We're under attack." To get their teacher's attention, Bakugo and Kirishima didn't wait for orders. One hurried forward to try to blow up another, janitors, while the other charged without any apparent plan other than the protection of his hardened skin. Many of the girls and Mineta screamed in horror and disgust at the same time, but Aizawa ran out of time to properly reprimand them before the flesh of more janitors tore apart and more swarms of large, mutant rats rushed out in waves. Even though this was Izuku's first encounter with rat spirits, he would have known that this was an old enemy of the Uritha, as he vaguely recalled from Kota and Mighty Wolf's stories. His blood cried out for something to eat. He saw no reason to deny it, since the class was overwhelmed by this new threat and the teachers were too busy to defend the students right away.
I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.